This is going to be a great day. I'm really looking forward to this. Hi, everybody. I am Morgan, aka Tempest, and this is my channel, Tempest Games, where I do world building live and TTRPG design, and like once a year I do board gaming content. And I am so happy that you're here for this little pilot episode for an idea that I've had. I've been wanting to do like a roundtable thing for a really, really long time. And I am, if you don't know this about me, a coward. And I will wait until the absolute last minute to do things like this, or invite people that I want to show up on things like this, so that their inevitable response is, I'm busy that day. Luckily, these two fellows have nothing better to do, so I am very pleased to have them on my channel. They're two of my favorite people. I can't wait to get to dive into this conversation. This is a pilot for an irregular series because I don't want to commit to a regular schedule yet. So for now, this is just whenever I've got a subject that I want to cover and some people that I want to get together and have this conversation with. The series is called Design with Intent. It's like, if you're familiar with American higher education, it's like a 200 level, sort of like maybe like a master's level conversation about TTRPG and adventure design. This is not beginner's design. This is bigger things that you want to keep in mind all the way out throughout the process. Things like theme, things like queerness, which is what we're talking about today. So I love the idea. I hope you love the idea too. I hope these guys love the idea as well. Prue will be joining us later. She has is just about now finishing up a Jasper's Day game. She is done up as the most beautiful fawn. If you've seen the pictures, you should check my Twitter. You'll see the pictures of the makeup that she's done. She's so fucking talented. Oh, they're one of my favorite people as well. I just can't. Yeah. I just can't. So if you would, from left to right, I guess. So Declan, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I am obviously coming down with something. But aside from that, my name is Declan. I've been involved in tabletop role-playing games for the better part of 17, 18 years now. The vast majority of that time is as a dungeon master. I prefer to DM rather than be a player. I am intrinsically interested in queer theory and queer narrative, so much so that the focus of my master's was on queer representation in Irish media. There was not a lot. It wasn't great.
I was gonna say none of us are experts here, but that is not true.
God, no.
Yeah, no, you literally got the academic. You got the letters, man. You got the letters.
Yeah, my letters are at the end. Meh. Which is what I think my thesis supervisor felt about my thesis. But what kind of draws me to tabletop role-playing games is the immersion element, and how we are able to use these games to not only have fun and make new friends, but also, depending on the table that you're at, learn and grow and develop as a person through them. And in my own games, queer identities and queer stories are very much a part of that, and how I use them to tell queer stories. Outside of all of that, malarkey. I am the DM for an Irish podcast called Romancing the Dungeon, a
so
softcore D&D podcast. And I only realized what softcore also inferred, and I meant softcore in the sense of like softcore D&D, like so bad at D&D, it's softcore. So
I assumed you knew that.
No, I didn't.
Did you not know that? Because I was like
literally last night this came to light when another one of my players was like, yeah, I almost didn't listen to you guys because it says softcore, and I was in work and I was like,
he literally just said that to me like 2 days ago.
No, we're free of that.
For me, it was a draw. I was like, ooh, softcore.
If I'm going to have any kind of core in my role-playing games, it has to be hardcore. So otherwise, go home. Why even bother?
So I'm done now. Goodbye, everybody.
That's so impressive. You just continue to impress me every minute.
From expert
Declan.
to idiot.
Oh, I love it. Okay, Rick, how about you? Who are you?
Hi, I'm Rick. I'm a forever DM. I DM for Morgan and a bunch of other lovely people. I'm the token Bachelor of Science person here today. I feel like I might be a little bit underqualified to talk on this subject, but here I am. You're just going to have to listen to me. You've got no choice. So there we go. Back to you, Morgan.
Ooh, okay. He's also a TTRPG designer. He's currently playtesting a game called 3 Meat, which you can find out about at grizzlyeye.com. And of course, I've been doing a shitty job as the host/producer and not doing that and this. There we go.
Very impressive.
Thank you.
I not sorry. I had to correct some of everyone's punctuation. We use Oxford commas on this channel.
Oh, okay. My Oxford comma is an exclamation point. You may have noticed.
We are the same person. I'm always apologizing for how many exclamation points are in all of my tweets.
I send far too many emails. You're like, I gotta take some of those exclamation points out. So I gotta think I'm very intense. I'll take some of them out.
When I get nervous, I add more.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Grizzlyeye.com. Go there. He talks about all of his games that he's designed, all of his supplements. He's got stuff up on DM's Guild. See, why am I doing this? You should be doing this for yourself.
I'm really terrible at self-publicity. You're so much better at it.
And he also talks about his other TTRPG thoughts, which are all really brilliant, in part because he runs them by me first, and I make sure they're not bullshit.
It's true. It's very true.
No, we need to, one of these days we need to sit down and we need to practice you talking about yourself.
I really hate talking about myself, but
What I found is the trick is what I do, which is basically to have a script that I just repeat every time, and then it just becomes a thing that you go bleh. And then you
See, I'm really
on.
good in interviews though. I'll ace every interview, but yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
I don't know. Usually as an Irish person, you're like, oh, we only talk about ourselves if we do a little bit of like self-depreciation in all that. So it's like, I'm really good at this, but I'll steal all your office supplies. So it's, it's kind of back and forth.
But I'm a terrible asshole. Sorry.
But...
Thank you for the follow, Eiley. I completely forgot where I was going to go with that. This is going to happen a lot. I'm a little bit spacey. Oh, right. I was going to say, before we get started, I was going to do a little bit of a disclaimer. We are not experts, except maybe Declan. That is debatable. The general policy on my channel is always, if we stick our foot in our mouths, I do it all the time. If we say something that you don't think is inappropriate, or if we need to be a little bit more thoughtful, please let us know. get in there and say something, and we will listen. Right? We'll listen. I didn't warn them. We have a listening policy here. I'm looking up to the left and the right, like I'm actually, it's like the fucking Brady Bunch here right now. They're not actually here and here.
We are.
No. We're like upstairs.
Excellent. Okay. So I wanted to start off asking a really fun question. And that is, how have you used tabletop role-playing games to explore your queerness and queer expression? Because I believe that we've all done this at some point.
I actually don't know if I have done that. I think I did a long time ago, but yeah.
Okay.
Well, we might want to talk about this later, but I feel like there's a sort of degree of self-consciousness I have about putting gay characters into stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that's something we can dive into later. But
certainly,
like
the further back in our history we get, definitely the more it makes sense that you might have been. I mean, for me, the first time I ever, I actually explored my non-binariness through a character in your campaign. And that was I was like, I think I might be non-binary. That's cool, except it would really suck to be a non-binary person who doesn't know how to use their own pronouns.
Yeah, that would help. Yeah,
because I've traditionally struggled to find queer communities, and so I had no familiarity with that kind of thing. So I made a character whose pronouns were they, them, and it helped me get used to how it worked. And I have that character and your game and you to thank for my ability to use they, them pronouns. Yeah. But what about you, Declan?
So I don't think so. My very first kind of foray into tabletop role-playing games, I don't think it was intentional. I don't think I've got the wherewithal at that age, as a 17-year-old, to fully understand what it was that I was doing. It's only kind of as the years have gone by and you look back in hindsight that you're like, oh, these characters say quite a bit about you. And it always depends on the table that you're at. If it's a table where min-maxing and rules and mechanics and all those things are very important, it kind of means that there's little room then for kind of character development. I've always been fairly fortunate and even kind of selective in what games I will play and who I will play with. And looking back on those past characters, so while I identify as queer, I suppose I've used a lot of my characters as a player and as a DM to get more confident and comfortable in that. Like a lot of the characters, and again, I'm not going to go back and go, basically all my characters, were, strong, powerful women. And I'm amazing at playing these. I don't come to that from that experience, but there's a part of myself that very much has, even as a child, identified and been drawn to that character archetype. And then suddenly I found myself bringing it into these games that I was playing and create, whether it was as a villain or as a player with a character or an NPC. So that side of it, that comfort that I have now in myself, both in terms of gender and sexuality, comes from tabletop role-playing games and getting the chance to connect with those identities that I've always been drawn to, but never really had again, a little bit like your own kind of experience, Tempest, in that sort of like, I was kind of unsure of what it actually meant. And it's only kind of now looking back that I'm like, this was you as a young person trying to make sense of a part of yourself and coming to terms with it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't develop the latent magic powers that all those characters actually had. But well, there's still time. I'm hoping there's still time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was any point where I felt like I was exploring my queerness through my sexuality through a character. Definitely my gender identity. I think I just really quickly, I'm also pan and poly. I am like a real life fucking bard, and I will apologize for this, but I don't mean it. It was just really normal for me, and maybe that's because I came to D&D really late. I had a couple of false starts early. It was only about 4 years ago that I actually started playing D&D, in which case it felt to me like I actually had permission to do these things without having to ask, if it makes sense. So when it came to my sexuality, in fact, I found myself frustrated, and then I felt like I was being quashed sometimes by the non-queerness around me. Like when one of my early characters was in fact a bard, and it was that bard, but I didn't know that that was a thing at the time. And I was trying to explain to the DM how my character was capable of recognizing the hotness in everyone. And that was clearly not the narrative that he wanted.
Oh, really? Oh no.
He does now.
I was like, I want to flirt with those people. He's like, the undead people? I'm like, yeah, them.
The undead people.
They're naturally hot.
I was like, point me out to the one that's the hottest in the room. And he's like, well, so yeah, I have you ever felt like your attempts to play your queerness or any kind of queerness was restricted? Say maybe more in a modern times than in the past, because I think we all kind of understand the past was a bit uglier.
Well, I mean, yeah, I've been pretty self-conscious about. Sorry, were you talking to Declan or me? Sorry.
No.
It's a conversation, so you're welcome to talk whenever you like.
I'm going to apologize now.
Far too polite, yes.
Well, it's a symptom, it's not me being polite, it's a symptom, but I'll do my best to not apologize for apologizing or anything. I feel very uncomfortable about putting my sexuality or my queerness into role-playing. Well, I'm happy for my players to explore queerness and things like that. Obviously, I'm not going to restrict it, and I try to encourage it, but I find it very awkward. Again, this self-consciousness thing, I find it difficult to put queer characters into my games in a non-self-conscious kind of way, and I know that that's not necessarily that it would appear to be self-conscious, but nevertheless I'm sort of like, why am I doing this? How is this character going to come across? Yeah, and I think that's sort of a permission thing. It stems from I guess this idea that gay characters should be there. You're putting your characters in your role-playing games for a reason, and what is the reason for having queer characters in your game? And I don't know, it's kind of a bit of a Gordian knot for me. I don't know how to
I mean, it's a struggle, especially me, is like this last year has been my first foray into TTRPG design, and for me, the struggle was I had a bit of a realization moment. I wonder if you did as well at any point, that I was writing a D&D adventure and not thinking about queerness at all. And I found myself writing in a queer character and then being really chuffed with myself about it, right? Like, oh, look. but then I realized it was one character in hundreds. And for all intents and purposes, those other 299 NPCs were all straight and cis. And that's when I started really thinking about this stuff and thinking like, oh shit, I mean, this character is excellent. It was a forest gnome who had been the savior of this group of half-elf refugees, and had fallen in love with one of the half-elves, one of the refugees, and they, you know, it was like 150 years later, were together and model citizens of this village that had formed up around the refugee camp. And the sad thing was that the half-elf partner was dying at the point of this adventure. And so you watch this older forest gnome taking care of his husband as he was dying. And that was just like a little side note on the adventure. And I found it to be really romantic, but I was terrified that it was also tokenistic. And then I started thinking, why do I not know whether or not the rest of my NPCs are queer? Did you ever have a point where you like had to make a choice to make your games queer?
I actually the point where Tempest was saying, you know, that tokenism element. So in our show, we don't make any sort of secret around kind of sexuality and stuff like that, and we have characters that identify as heterosexual. We have characters that are, you know, bi or queer, questioning, and so on and so forth. And you know, those are within kind of the player's foray. But
yeah, when
I started looking at my story and the adventures and the things that were coming into it, straight out of, and pardon the pun, but straight out of the main kind of foray into the start of this, where, you know, the bard, why is it always the bard marries, you know, the kind of the old lady in the wedding dress. She gets kidnapped, and then they're chasing her down, and they come across a band of rogues who have, you know, stopped a carriage and are in the middle of all this, in the middle of robbing these businessmen. And as we were going through it, and this was happening live, it wasn't even planned, but as we were going through it, one of the players ends up in the carriage, having rescued all of them. They hitch a lift to where they're going, and the player notices that an elf and the human who are sitting opposite each other kind of keep doing that like weird eye flirty, looking up, looking back, and kind of flushing. And, you know, it being that character kind of questions, you know, what's going on here, why, and it, you know, quickly it evolves that, you know, there was something between them both, but they're not really sure what it means for them, and you know, who are they? They end up kissing. She feels really embarrassed in that, like, oh, I made that happen, and then like, oh, they're kissing, I gotta look away, you know, give them their time. And we wrapped up that session, and we all had a great time. It was a nice thing to have in the middle of it all. And then I was like, did I do that on purpose? Was that subconscious that it was coming through? Was that designing with intent? And for me, I design with what I'm comfortable with, and I've throughout all the kind of the various games, and even these sort of the pre-made adventures, you know, like the established adventures for the likes of D&D. Like, I'm running Curse of Strahd at the moment, and like the ongoing joke is it's Curse of Strahd, like, you know, yeah, elongate that rat, you know, like, I have, and I think, and I kind of what Rick was saying, you know, that kind of that self-consciousness around it. I find myself every now and again kind of going, am I doing this because I like that. I want there to be representation, and I want there to be more of this in these spaces that I'm in? Or is this something other? Is this a part of myself that is just kind of coming through my games? And I personally, I don't like to think of what I'm doing as tokenism. It doesn't mean I don't worry about it. It doesn't mean that like I'm, am I just putting that in there as a, like, oh, also we have, we've got queer people, take a box and we're done. The narrative is open to everybody. I feel like, well, your main storyline isn't about gay people or queer people. I'm like, not that you don't know, but it's. I think when we talk about intention, we do kind of have to go back to what Rick was saying in that sense of a conscious decision and a subconscious decision, especially as queer designers, as queer writers and creators, players. There's always going to be a little bit of ourselves in what we are putting out there, and that separation is, it is kind of threading a line with that. How much of yourself do you want to put in your work, in that character, in that adventure?
Yeah.
And how much of yourself are you willing to kind of stave off the page? That you no, it's going to be this, and so on and so forth. I'd like to think I do it because I'm comfortable with who I am, and the players who come to my table are comfortable or are looking to develop an awareness around that. There's room for exploration in that space, and I think that's important.
For sure.
Yeah, that's the radical thing about what we're trying to do. Thinking back to an anecdotal story that perhaps shows my discomfort with putting queer characters in my games was when I was just come out and I was playing a Dark Sun game with my brother, and I was playing an elf, and Darks and elves are fucking cool, and I made him gay, and he flirted with someone, and then my brother had a big problem with that and said, why, there aren't any gay people in Dark Sun. And that's interesting because I feel like a lot of the reason I don't put is a lot of shame, and I think that's quite powerful. And that's why I think designing with queer intent is quite radical, but it's about, we're saying, we're pussyfooting around and tentatively putting queer characters into our games, and when we should be, setting up shop and putting our feet under the chair and saying, well, no, we're part of this, move over, and sort of claiming our own space. And I think we need to really think like that, rather than, because I think we're talking about representation later, and I think representation just doesn't go far enough. We don't just want to represent queer characters. I feel like we want to make games that are queer.
Yeah.
There was I think Ralph is redacted said, D&D is intrinsically queer. That's just facts. That's facts according to my mother, who thinks all gay people play Dungeons and Dragons. Like, she thinks it's because her only experience of it is her, her queer son, who's very into it, and my younger brother, who also happens to be gay, is or was very much into tabletop role-playing games, and is very much now into massive multi-online player role-playing games. And she just assumes that, it's just a gay people thing. Just, like some of them like dancing and going out and, fashion. Other people love Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh,
like, that's so progressive of you, Mom.
She'll be so sad when she finds out the truth, though.
Don't tell her shit.
But then I think there is a strong link between queerness and fantasy. A lot of gay people are into fantasy, and I think there is a strong link there. I actually think that, especially we're seeing a lot at the moment with like what I call the pink tiefling school of Dungeons and Dragons. We're seeing that space is sort of being more, we're commanding it a bit more, but it's definitely always known. I've definitely always seen a strain of Dungeons and Dragons where there was a big representation of gay people, or gay people really interested in it, but again, didn't feel comfortable enough to put their feet under the table. And
it's a really interesting thing about the D&D narrative, like the story of D&D, and the queer narrative, in that I think both well, D&D began as a subculture while at the same time, the queerness was still very much a subculture. And as I think we all know and understand, subcultures attract each other. And I also think that there is that they went from, I don't know if you can call them, pop culture yet at this point. I mean, I think we can say it's pop culture now, both queerness
D&D?
and D&D.
Oh, I
yeah,
mean,
okay.
Come here. There's a rainbow lamp of a D20 in GameStop. We've hit.
Okay, so then what I was trying to say was that I think that actually the story of the two things have sort of moved at a similar pace and have become pop culture, at very close to each other. And I think they're very much entwined, and potentially they have aided each other in their evolution into pop culture. Would you agree with that? Do you think maybe D&D has had some influence on people's acceptance of queerness?
I mean, this is interesting because perhaps you need to define terms here, but I see there's a difference between queerness and LGBTQI+ and things like that. I think by definition, queerness, I may be wrong about this, but by definition, queerness is, LGBTQ is about moving queerness into, more mainstream society and becoming accepted. But queerness is about the fact that being gay, being LGBTQI is itself a radical thing, and that we can never be accepted by mainstream, neither do we want to be. So
because coming at it from a kind of a queer theory element of it, like queer theory proposes taking a look at heteronormative structures, okay, and looking at it through a queer lens and kind of looking at what's established and how queerness doesn't necessarily fit in it but operates through it, sort of a thing. And I would kind of agree with Rick very much there that you do have there is kind of a distinguishing thing, and queerness is it's equal but separate. It's that we are equal, our relationships are just as valid, our identities are just as valid, but that does not mean they need to be co-opted into a cis heteronormative experience. So not every queer person wants to settle down, get married, have children, white picket house, go, I don't know, horse polo, whatever horse polo is, at the weekends. It's not. I'm assuming. I don't know.
Horse polo as opposed to alligator polo.
Yeah, that's the thing. That I would watch. That's the queer version of both.
We live dangerously. What can I say?
But I do agree with Rick there, and that I think queerness often tries to subvert a lot of what people are comfortable with, and not to shock and not to upset, but more to kind of point out there are other ways of doing and being and existing. And I think that's what queerness does in tabletop role-playing games. It is, okay, you can sit there and we can roll dice, we can crunch some numbers, and we can we can fight the Draco Lich or whatever and be done with it. And I think this Tempest is where we can kind of we circle back a little bit into what you were saying. Queerness has kind of taken tabletop role-playing games and that concept of escapism and very much gone and went, okay, that's one way of playing this.
Right.
This is how we like to play this. We like, and don't get me wrong, there are plenty of queer people who love, give me the crunch, give me the math. I'm like, I have to do my health with a calculator. But and that's the way they operate at their table. But queerness very much subverts a lot of what we would argue is the mainstream perception of tabletop role-playing games, which is a bunch of cis hetero white guys sitting in a basement, all wearing cloaks, eating pizza, and rolling dice and pretending to shoot, eldritch blasts or whatever. and queerness takes that and just throws that image in the bin, and it's like, no, this is what we do and this is how we play.
Well, on that, I mean, I kind of agree with what Ralph is saying, that D&D and TTRPGs in general are a great way to explore identities, regardless of whether or not they're queer identities. And in fact, I've always been hugely surprised that the people we think of traditionally as D&D players, so, you know, the Grognards, are not more evolved human beings than they are, or than that we see them as a stereotype. It always surprised, ever since really getting to know what D&D is and TTRPGs are, it's just shocking, because I am a person, I am a human being who has been through a lot of therapy. And I think it is a truth in this world that we have yet to produce any queer people or people of color or neurodivergent people who have not been traumatized in some way. And the thing is there's this trope in therapy that your therapist is always going to try to get you to be role-playing things out in order to understand the situation better, to get a bigger picture view. And there's this joke that TTRPGs are free therapy. And my captions are broken. Oh, shoot. I hate that. Thank you, Tal. So...
FYI, guys, get therapy. Don't use role-playing.
Yeah.
Whatever you do,
it's not a
use
substitute.
Free therapy, no.
And if there's any of my players in the chat, ignore what was just said, and you can send me your checks.
So, it's always surprised me that that these Grognards were no longer Grognards through playing D&D so much, because the opportunity to role play, it's a legitimate therapeutic practice, is supposed to give you better perspective, and yet I know from personal experience that has been a huge part of playing in TTRPGs. I don't really talk about this because I think it's maybe a bit unfair on your fellow players and your DM to be like, I'm using this as therapy. But there is definitely an element of me exploring my personality, especially my neurodivergence. That's been a really big thing for me. And the last couple of years has been such an enormous time of growth for me as a human being, because I'm allowing that to happen to me. And I think in that way, TTRPGs are also inherently subversive. And I think that is just a relationship that was always waiting to happen for queers to use TTRPGs as a subversive vehicle for their own subversiveness. I've used that word a lot now, but do you know what I mean? And
yeah, I mean,
does
I
that
think
make
that's
sense?
the link between queerness and fantasy, right? Is that it's about being able to, being so confined in straight cis society, that, and then you've got Fantasyland, which is, you know, a great way, you know, all this stuff about magic and, you know, fairies and things like that is just subtext or subtext for what we really want to be doing, which is to be ourselves. Yeah. But we can't, and we don't have any power, so we give our characters magical abilities and things like that.
So how do we, I think this begs the question, how do we make the queerness, getting back to the design aspect of this, how do we make the queerness and the queer cast itself more visible to the player, to the DM?
Well, I think we just need to stop making games that aren't about us and start making games that are about us. And I'm as guilty of this as anything. You know, we make like role-playing games, and it's this sort of, again, it's like this sort of rationalist perspective that you just make the system and then you build the games built on top of the system. But no, we need to be just like, and then they might happen to be queer if we like put queer people in them. I suppose you need to invert that and build with us in mind and put us at the center of it. So then we don't feel like we need to ask permission to put ourselves in it. They need to ask permission to come into our games, I guess, would be my first thought on that.
Okay.
I think it's quite interesting because if we even kind of if we put kind of games, tabletop role-playing games, to like even not even to one side, but hold it in kind of one hand, and then you look at all other forms of media, whether it's film, literature, music, art, there's it's a subsection. It's treated as a subsection to the mainstream. So you go to a bookshop, there's, you know, an LGBTQIA plus book stand, a bookshelf, and it's great for finding stuff, but it's separated. It's not, even if it's the biggest best-selling book or it's a really powerful story, you're not going to find it mixed in with, you know, the classics or modern literature, whatever it might be. And, you know, it's the reason why, you know, the likes of Spotify or iTunes have, like, you know, queer playlists and so on and so forth. There are audiences out there for this content, and there are audiences out there for queer content. There are queer people who want to only be in a space that is for them, you know, that it is, there's a comfort, there's a safety, there's a commonality, even a community around that. And that's where I think as queer designers, that should be our first responsibility, is to, we are not creating content, we're not creating queer content for the people outside of that to kind of come in and gawk at it like it's a tourist thing. You know, it's not, you know, it's not a zoo. Queer literature, queer works of art, whatever they might be, they're not fascinating because it's queer, because it's, you know, it's right. It's that to me is that's voyeurism. You know, that's someone cis heteronormative kind of looking in, going, oh, that's interesting. That's a bit different. Well, Mavis, we've had a great day out. Let's go home now and play some horse polo. You know, it shouldn't be treated like a spectacle or like a show. We need to start looking at the value in our stories, in our narratives, in our games, and really bringing that up, and not even just as a sort of within the community, but also kind of just elevating it to the same heights as the mainstream. Like, because we're even using that word, you know, it's queer, therefore it's not mainstream. Well, it's been largely adopted because, you know, we released it in June, and, you know, whatever publishing company got on board with it, and they're pushing it, and they've changed their logo with a rainbow, and they're pushing our Kickstarter, they're pushing our you know, our DMs Guild page where our queer stories are. Great. They're going to do that for the better part of, you know, 30 days, and then we're forgotten about again. It's so I think it starts like, you know, that the intent starts with us and starts with our community, that we elevate those narratives, those designs to the place that they should be at. And I'm not saying we have to, you know, I'm not saying we live in this bubble and anyone who goes outside the bubble is forbidden from alligator polo. That's not what I'm saying. But it's a case of that we're going to make this a thing, by the way. Can we make
totally
this a thing?
Now.
We get some alligators.
Alligators. The polo and the horses versus the alligators. The horses never win. So
I can see the memes already.
This be an adventure. I want to make this an adventure. I'm going to make this a queer adventure with alligators and polo. I have to learn the rules of polo, by the way. But I'll figure it out. There's a ball. But
I actually think we should be more radical even than that. And I think one thing that's really lacking that I haven't seen is queer readings of Dungeons and Dragons, especially the OSR stuff, things like that, you know, wizards, elves, going into dungeons, adventurers are marginalized people. We need to start, not only do we need to make our own space, but we need to take some of that other space that the cis-het people have and bring it back into our sphere.
I guess my concern with that, I think there's a tremendous amount of value in that being around and that being available for us as queer people. I think we need that. But my concern is that as soon as we start making things for queers, by queers, we run into the issue of we are now not necessarily isolating ourselves, but isolating other people who we are fully aware are going to voluntarily segregate themselves from our queerness if they can tell that it's beyond a threshold of queerness that they're comfortable with. It's my preference personally to sneak up on them with my queerness. So I have a +12 to stealth, thank you.
But your gear cannon just went off, so that disadvantage.
Because I think that, and this is, I think, where not everyone should have to stick to what I'm about to describe, because I think that we all have our personal levels of what we are, the advocacy that we're comfortable with having for ourselves and for our queerness and for our issues. Some people just don't have the spoons for it, and that's okay. You deal with that kind of stuff. You are just the right level of activist for what you're comfortable with, really. I personally have started noticing that over the last couple of years, I have been able to access the activist part of my personality more, and thus I feel a bit of a responsibility. And so I want to make a game that is not necessarily one that's going to attract a grognard, but is going to attract your normal player, that is not going to attract someone based on their queerness. And then once they start playing it, they're going to be confronted with the queerness that's in, I would like to think, real life. If you know me and my games and my designing, you'll understand that I am fascinated with the ordinariness of fantasy. So I love fantasy, and I tend to stick to fantasy, but then everything in it is super ordinary. The emotional journeys are really realistic. That's the way that I like to play my fantasy, and I know some people aren't really into that. I'm not into the hero journey. I'm into my character got dragged kicking and screaming and left as soon as they possibly could. I'm into those emotional journeys, you know. I'm into the journey of someone having everything they ever loved taken away from them, and as a move into self-destruction, started hunting down bandits. Do you know what I mean? And so it's that level of sort of normalcy for me, of ordinariness, that I think that I'm trying to write, like literally intentionally write in queer stories and queer characters into what is otherwise a very basic fantasy game. If you look at my notes, I'm actually really nervous about this, and I don't like showing my notes to people because it literally says this person is trans, this person is gay, this person is pansexual, and it's not because I still don't even know if that's gonna be in the final book in any way. But I do know that I need to set my intention with those characters so that because for me at least, my basic narrative is still cis het, and that really bothers me. So I set these intentions in my notes so that I'm reminding myself to write those queer stories and those queer characters. Do either of you have any methods that you use to remind yourself of it, or does it come more naturally to you?
Personally speaking, I think it just falls out of my mouth. Like I don't set out with, and I can't pretend to say that I go into a session or an adventure with that direct intention, but I, even because it was a point that Rick made about kind of claiming a little bit of the mainstream space as our own. Last summer, when we were all in the height of all the lockdowns, everything like that, I started running some games for friends and people who were new to tabletop role-playing games. Mm-hmm. And if anyone's familiar with the Lost Mines of Phandelver, the Dragon of Icespire Peak, they're the two kind of easy kind of intro Wizards of the Coast foray into Dungeons and Dragons. And in both versions, in both games, the innkeeper Toblin Stonehill in my world is a queer man, and in our first session 0, the guys were in Neverwinter, had a letter from the lieutenant that he'd asked, because they were going in that direction, they were going to Phandelver, and asked, well, would they take the letter to Toblin? And there was no sort of, it's hush hush, it's secret, it's more, this is a personal favor to me, I'll give you an extra 15 gold pieces if you deliver it, whatever it might be. I'm awful with money, you can tell, I just get 15 gold to deliver a letter. But they dropped the letter off, and there was at no point did they walk in and Toblin was standing there, and the Stonehill Tavern is, it's a gay pub. There's nothing to separate it from, his identity from the space that they were in. But one of the characters, once the letter had been handed over, one of the characters was like, can I just maybe kind of hone in a little bit on Toblin? I just want to have a look. I want to see his reaction. He's reading the letter. Do I notice anything? And his reaction was very emotional, because like you were saying, Tempest, it's the ordinary that I like to express. And it was a simple letter from one man to another declaring how much he misses him. And that he wanted, to maybe rekindle that relationship. That player would and did check in with Toblin in a very sort of sensitive way. It wasn't like, hey, what's that? It was very much, how are we, what's going on here? What, you seem a little bit flustered by the letter, and Toblin was quite private, did not want to go, oh, I'm a queer man, this letter is from my ex and he wants to get back together. He kept that secret to himself. Yeah. And not because, it was more like, who the hell are you? You've just walked into my pub. I'm not going to tell you my life story. Because the ordinary, that's a real person in my head. But over the course of the adventure, that character, that player, who is not, to the best of my knowledge, does not identify as a queer person, kind of continued to engage with this queer character and helped bring that story, that little kind of thread of a narrative, into what is a very, light mainstream game with no hint of queerness to it, and without it being sort of the Stonehill Tavern is the local gay bar, everyone goes there on Friday nights, it's 2-for-1 margaritas, and the druid is also our drag queen, kind of a thing. There was no need to kind of exacerbate it. It was that, like you said, it's the ordinary, and finding the thread that you can kind of weave into that and just make it a part of your space. That is what I find comes very naturally to me. Whether my players want that, well, it's my game and I'm writing it. That's the,
Yeah. Hi, crew. How are you?
Hello.
I'm so impressed.
Your chip buddy.
I'm so impressed that you not only took off the fawn makeup, which we were actually kind of hoping you would have kept,
It's technically still the fawn makeup from the eyes up.
Oh, okay. That's very clever of you. I hope everyone managed to get a look of Prue's fawn makeup for the Jasper's Day game. It was really impressive. We were making jokes about how the fawn makeup needed to be the new Gay Agenda's uniform. And if we had had forewarning that you were gonna do the fawn makeup prior to joining this game, that we would have all done it as well. Just been a bunch of queer fawns talking about queer games.
That would have been adorable.
That would have been amazing. Yeah, I would have loved it. I would have 100% loved that. So Prue, thank you for joining us.
No worries.
And would you, since we've got a little bit of a good spot here, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sure. Hi, I'm Prue. I use she, they pronouns. I am Proopy Pants everywhere on the internet. I do a lot of tabletop role-playing game stuff. If you are around on like UK tabletop Twitter, you've probably run into me at least once or twice. I spout silly opinions. I dabble a tiny bit in game design, but I mostly play and run tabletop games, and I play them on stream sometimes. And I've run, I think, 100% of the Pride content we've put out over at Chasing Tales. That has always been spearheaded by me. And yeah, I'm also bisexual. I feel like that's relevant to bring up at the queerette table.
Great. I'm so glad that you were able to join us.
Thank you for waiting for me. I really appreciate it.
Well, of course. Absolutely. 100%. You are a very valuable member of the community, and I feel very lucky that you are willing to come join me on this conversation. I said early at the beginning that I'm such a coward when it comes to these things. Like, I wanted to do something like this ages ago. And only have just now gotten around to it. And I still, I wanted there to be more people, but I was such a coward that it took me so long to invite them. And some of them I haven't invited at all, that the only response I knew they were going to be able to give me was, I'm doing something that day. Which is also why I'm so impressed that you join us as well, because you've already been at it for a few hours, and you're joining us for a couple of more.
I booked a Monster of the Week game after this.
Oh no! You did not. Oh, hilarious.
Tabletop can have my Saturdays. I don't mind.
That's brilliant. Well, so we were just getting onto the subject of, we were discussing how we intentionally put queer characters, queerness into our games and our adventures. And I think we can also sort of bring in world building as well. I love your phrasing on this, Declan, with world building with joyful queerness in mind. Do you have any thoughts on that, Prue? Or no, go ahead, Declan.
No. I please. I feel like I haven't shut up the entire time, so I'm happy to sit here and be quiet for a few minutes. That's okay.
Yeah. I have lots of thoughts on this because it's my favorite thing to do, is to include queerness as a standard. And it's not something you have to necessarily draw attention to. It varies table to table. Sometimes when you're playing with an entire table of cishet players, you'll introduce someone and he uses he, him pronouns and he's got a husband, and they're all like, ooh, and you're like, yes, he's gay. It doesn't need to be drawn attention to, and these gay characters have happy lives. That can be difficult in some scenarios. For example, there is a gay couple actually written into Rime of the Frost Maiden, and when I introduced them, everyone's like, Prue, why are you putting... They were joking me. They're like my lovely queer friendly table. They were like, Prue, why are you putting your gay agenda in our game? And I was like, actually, it's Wizards of the Coast to put these people in, not me. I'm like, because that's a horror game, their lives aren't easy, their lives are hard because it's the nature of the game. But I'm not making their lives hard in like a homophobic way, or in a way that it's like, oh, the only gay characters you meet, I'm gonna kill them off. No, not that. And I really find so much joy in designing characters who aren't cis, because it's so hard to find that representation a lot of the time, and it done in a kind way. And so, for example, this was one of my favorite moments of the last year. Just, you know, one of those little moments when someone post game, like a player makes a comment and it really like lifts your heart, was I did a Monster of the Week one shot where these turf bots were destroying Pride, and this crazy doctor called Dr. Binary had made these turf robots that were going to suck up all the flags and suck up all the glitter and tear down all of the speakers, blasting ABBA everywhere, and it was just silly fun.
I love it so much.
And I made this character who he was the head of the Pride committee, so he was like an intelligent, well-established man. He was the person who ran Pride in this city every year. And I made him trans without it being like a big deal, but also mentioning it so that then the queer masculine people on the call were like, I don't ever see like trans masks in games. Like, thank you for putting him in. Because he showed up, I made him like a leather gaze. He had his little harness on, his little cap. And I was like, he's got his harness on, he's got his top surgery scars, he's got cute tattoos all around them. He's got like a gorgeous mustache and like some cute eyeliner on, and he was driving around this big like parade float. And like, you just can mention it that offhandedly, and that establishes this like joyful, good character. And so I love definitely joyful world building where you're like, yes, this character is happy, their life is happy, they are queer, and the world doesn't revolve around the fact that they're queer.
That makes me think about sort of something else we wanted to talk about, which was like, how do you signal things like the fact that someone is trans, and do it tastefully and respectfully? For me, that's it's much easier, I think, to signal sexuality. In that it's very visible in who we choose to love and be attracted to, and it's something we're all familiar with, the expression of sexuality, because it occurs in, you know, in most of us. Let us not forget our ace pals, of course. But transness for me, and I was really hoping to get someone who was maybe a bit more of an expert than me in this subject, but they were all busy. I do identify as trans, but obviously I'm not binary trans, and there's a whole other story involved in being binary trans. Do we feel comfortable talking a little bit about what may or may not be safe and respectful in expressing trans identities in our games?
I can speak to kind of some element, and not from a place as a lived experience, or even as a, you know, a truly kind of informed experience, but with the idea of, and as Prue was, you know, as we were talking about that idea of, you know, creating, you know, queer spaces and queer identities, and not really having to be like, oh, this is them, this is the queer person in the game now. We're at this point. In one of my homebrew games, and again, I stole the name, but only because I've kind of got a crush on the character. But Toblin Stonehill is a captain in a ship in one of my homebrews, and his crew are a fairly motley bunch. There's a gay couple who are married, and again, it's never said, oh, these are the two, you know, gay lads on the ship. They're married, their husbands. It's only kind of discovered when one player found a gift that was kind of had been engraved, and the other one found something kind of carved into the wood, and it was just their initials, and those kind of small little things. But one of the members of the crew is an NPC named Rinny, and Rinny is Two-Spirit, and this is kind of I don't identify as trans. I can't speak to that story, but I didn't want to go, well, Declan, your lived experiences as a queer person are then valid. I wanted my players to know that in this space, all these identities are here, and it wasn't now let's sit down and discuss this because I've read the Wikipedia page, and the captain simply introduced Rennie as, this is Rennie. They are and I like, as bad as I was with the kind of the concept of trans, I was just as bad when it came to the ship and like boat terminology. So I was like, Rennie is a crew person, and they were effectively in charge of maintaining the rooms and so on and so forth. It was never again like Prue's experience. It was never kind of all arrows now point down at Rennie and everybody has to be aware of this moment. It was simply, this is another experience, this is another person, this is another identity, and we're going to move on. And one of the players again engaged with Rennie to a certain point, and they were talking about it. And the one thing I wanted in my head was, I didn't want it to be, oh, Rennie ran away and they're on a ship now and they, their family hate them and they don't talk to them. Rennie was like, no, I work on the ship. I send money home to mom and dad. They're great. We're heading to the place I come from. Rennie also then happened to get kidnapped by Chul, but only because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the crew were like, we have to go get them. We have to go and rescue them and so on and so forth. And we're now dealing with the consequences of that encounter at another stage. Personally speaking, I was a little, I don't want to say apprehensive. I was a little bit more conscious of what I was doing at that state, because it's not an experience that is fully, that I have lived, or I fully kind of I'm informed on. I have trans friends, and so on and so forth, but I can't really speak to those stories and those experiences. But at the same time, I didn't want to not have that inclusion, have that element in my worlds.
Yeah, I feel quite similarly about it. I make sure I do note if someone, like Prue earlier, we were talking, actually no, sorry, I want to repeat this for Prue's sake, and in case we have any new audience members, and because we're talking about a bit of a more sensitive subject here. I have a foot and mouth policy on my channel. If at any point you feel like we are saying something that's complete bullshit and we don't know what we're talking about, if you think we're being a bit too controversial, or if you're really uncomfortable by something that we've said, or if you think we need to be educated by your own personal lived experience, please say something. Please let us know. Sorry, go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to say, probably speaking from a position of ignorance, but why are we like hiding behind signifiers? Why don't we just say character is bi, character is gay, trans? Why are we hiding behind, well, not hiding behind signifiers, but why do we need two signifiers? Why couldn't we just say?
I think it's a really interesting point. Sorry, Tempest.
Go ahead.
Am I okay to jump in? Cool. Yeah. Because I was going to say that is like, if you want to say a character is trans in your game, the most respectful way to do it, if you're not sure, is to do what very classically the Adventure Zone Balance did, which is like a very famous trans NPC in a D&D actual play, and say, this character is trans. That's all you need to know about it.
Yeah.
The end. And then it isn't brought up again. And that's a good way to do it, because then you're not pinning your own beliefs about trans people onto a character that you don't have the lived experience for. That's a really like safe way to do it. And that also I really enjoy as a way to do it, because then that character is just a normal person. And you're like, they're a normal person. They're a trans person. See, this isn't a whole thing. This is fine. But there is, I would say the flip side to that is that, like, so I live with two trans masculine people who take testosterone, are pursuing surgeries and things like that. And there are things that are just day-to-day jokes and like
Yeah.
silly things that happen in our lives that would not happen if I did not live with two trans masked people. We were literally joking about it downstairs, that like, because they take testosterone, they eat a lot, and so they always eat all the leftovers. And I think being able to put in little sprinkles like that, and like create this like believable NPC is really pleasant and nice for a player at that table who has that life experience or knows people with that, you know, you're like, I get it. Yeah, it's that joke about like taking testosterone, or whatever. But the problem is that you can't do that subtly unless you really know what you're talking about. And so I would always caution people to like stray not on that side of the line unless they're confident that their table is comfortable and they're doing it respectfully. That's a very, very hard line to tread. And that is where like I have to be like, I can't give any more advice about that. Like I've had people, I tweeted about the fact that after a game, the trans masculine person was like, oh, I've never seen a trans mask in a game represented before. That was amazing. I was like, oh, that really lifted my heart, tweet. And someone came to my replies being like, how do I do that in my games? And I was like, I can't tell you. I'm sorry. I just know two very lovely trans masked men who tell me all about their, like they talk about it very openly with me, and we have very open, fun, friendly relationship. But like not everyone has that in their immediate friends group, and not everyone can access that kind of in-depth knowledge about.
I'm in a local trans support group, and I don't have an intimate relationship with any binary trans individuals like you do, but I have a similar experience from being a part of this group and being able to read their conversations about their own transitions, and it's been hugely enlightening and very beautiful and lovely and sweet and often sad and frustrating. I mean, you make a really good point, because one of the things I brought up earlier is that like my notes in my world building, all of my NPCs have a note for each of them that says their sexuality and gender. I have traditionally always worried about flagging someone as trans mask or trans femme, because that tends to be an issue with binary trans individuals, that how they wish to be perceived by other people. And what I've always worried about is if I'm just flat out saying someone is trans mask, does that out them in a way that a trans mask person might not be comfortable being outed? Or because I know that, and this is the thing that I think I especially want to express in relation to transness. Trans people don't always agree with each other. Trans people do not all believe the same things about their transness and about how other people relate to them or their expectations of them and their transness. And to me, that is the biggest issue with expressing transness in our games and in our art. Especially if you don't share that identity. And what I would always say is especially if you are not a trans person, but also if you are a trans person and you want to publish a game or an adventure that depicts trans people, get a trans sensitivity reader. 100%. Get a sensitivity reader. Super important. You need to understand what issues are at stake. You need someone who understands them, who can express that to you and then pose the problem to you. Because sometimes, and I hate this, but sometimes you have to pick sides in an argument about queerness. And you need to, it's best done when you're fully informed. So yeah, I think you helped me just then, Prue, with this issue that I've been having about my notes being very clearly depicting someone as trans or cis or trans mask or non-binary, and whether or not that would end up in the end product. that maybe, as you say, that's actually a more free and I guess non-judgmental way of expressing that clearly.
Yeah, you're just kind of. So when I've bought modules that have queer content in them, very often someone is just described with the labels they would use for themselves as an NPC, and you describe that to your players, and that's that. It doesn't have to be more complicated, and you can add whatever flair you want to add, you know.
Yeah.
Perhaps they're a non-binary fashion designer, and so all of their clothes are intentionally androgynous or whatever. You know, you can add your little sprinkles that you feel are respectful and nice on top.
Yeah.
But like, you can, I'm, you know, very much in agreement with Rick that you can just say, and then play that character just as anybody else would, because as soon as you start doing things like playing that character intentionally one way or another, that's when you start getting into the like sketchy territory, and you might end up putting yikes stuff in.
Yeah, but then this is where I think things get a bit tricky, because I don't think representation is enough. I think, well, representation is the baseline, and for cis-het design, but for queer design, I think we need to go a bit beyond representation, but that's going to be really difficult while being sensitive. But yeah, for example, because fundamentally, I mean, I'm gay, I'm not the same as a straight person. I don't want to be treated like a straight, well, I don't want to be mistreated, but I am a gay person and we're not the same. And I'm sure that's the same for bisexual people and trans people. We have different experiences that other people can't relate to. And I feel like we're not doing justice to those identities by treating them as just another NPC or just another.
Yeah. Rick, can you go to your captions page and just click on the... No, it's fixed. There we go. So Roll for Felicity is asking, she says, I like a lot of the examples of putting signifiers in games that aren't outright saying it. Is there a danger of kind of exoticizing or being cagey about queerness by being hinty about it as opposed to just saying it?
I think it goes back to that idea or that image I had when we were talking about it, you know, that it's not a spectator thing, it's not a spectacle. Kind of like what Prue was saying, they are another person in this story, in this adventure, in this game, in that moment. And I think it very much depends on the table that you have in front of you. The interesting side, and I think where we need to be a little bit more aware, I can't even say it's growing or developing, it exploded, but you know, streaming and even podcasting, you know, tabletop role-playing games, and you have to remember that beyond your table in that side of stuff, there's a whole audience with very different experiences and very different approaches to stuff. And there is an element where we have to be sensitive to the identities that we are using. And again, Tempest, it goes back to what you're saying in that, you know, dabbling in something that you may not be au fait with, and reaching out to kind of go, is this okay? Am I doing this correctly before you even? It's not a case of, you know, do it and ask for forgiveness after the fact. It's if you want to bring these things into your space and you want to put that space out there for other people to watch or listen, then you need to be informed as the DM, and you also need to make sure that your players are equally as informed. And otherwise, you end up, as Prue was saying, some fairly yikes kind of moments where you might not have intended to go to stereotypes or tropes. They're the things that are often kind of thrown at us particularly with even with queer characters. The gay guy is loud and he's campy and he's high energy and he's all these things. And yes, there are plenty of queer people who are loud and camp, and that's. I just put my hand up. That's me. But I don't speak. I am not the president, not yet, of queer people. But I'm
Make Declan the president of the gays. We've all been saying it.
We're working on that. There's a nomination in the next newsletter.
Thank you. We'll let the council know. It starts here. But it's very much, and I think, and kind of like what we were talking about. If you're writing, a module, or you're coming up with a game of your own, and queerness is a fundamental part of that, we have to be sensitive to those communities, and we have to be. We were talking. I talked about elevating the community. The foundation of that is respect. It starts there, and having very much a sort of an understanding that even with your best intent as a designer, and even from my own experiences, there are things I am going to get wrong. The important thing there is you learn from it, you grow from it, and you don't repeat it. And accepting that you haven't been as informed on that subject, on that experience, and moving on and growing from that is very much a huge aspect to it. In the same way that our own lived experiences inform us and develop our identities, we also have to understand that we're not the main character. You know what I mean? There are it's a whole world of main characters, and everybody has a right to be heard and respected. That's the starting point.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you, and there's a difference. I think maybe I don't want to repeat your point. The point that I would like to make is that it's very easy to accuse someone of being cagey about their queerness, of being cowardly about their queerness. It's a really easy accusation to make. But I think the opposite end of that, as Roll for Felicity was pointing out, or suggesting, and you pointed out, is making a spectacle of it. That is perhaps more objectively inappropriate and uncomfortable to the community than being subtle about it. And that's my personal feeling. But I had traditionally always been a little anti-camp. And maybe that's just me being, just a little bit like, wow, that's a lot. I don't know if I can handle that much. And then actually, I think as the closer, the more intimate I get with the queer community, the more comfortable I am with it. But I would find it really offensive to be confronted with a game that wasn't trying to make a spectacle of it, if that makes sense. If it was a spectacle because like in a tokenistic sense, like we were talking about earlier.
This is what I struggle with, is where do you draw the line? Because I agree that I get uncomfortable for similar reasons when queer characters are put at the center of things, but how much of that is because it's a spectacle? And what I struggle is that because it's a spectacle, or is that my own shame that I'm seeing reflected back on me? Should I feel ashamed of the fact that it's a difficult one, because I can't really answer it myself.
It's definitely one of the hardest things I've ever, I definitely will not admit that to every queer person in the world, that I'm made uncomfortable by campness, by queer spectacles.
There's I'm like the weirdest person for video games and so on and so forth, and I'll come to things very, very late. And rather than pick up Breath of the Wild, I was like, I'll get Dragon Quest 11. That'll be that's gonna be just as good. There's a character in Dragon Quest 11. I don't know how many people are particularly familiar with that game, but there's a character called Sylvando, who he appears. Literally, he appears as a spectacle. He's in a circus tent. There might have even been an explosion of rose petals, and he throws daggers, and he has a whip and all these things. And I remember being like, oh wow, okay, I'm kind of digging his energy. And then very quickly I went, I think, is he meant to be here as a joke? Because he kind of flirts with the boys, like the men. Sorry, he flirts with the male characters, but not in a sort of an outright kind of way. He says things, and then his mini story, and spoilers for anyone who's playing it, sorry, his mini story then involves him gathering other men. They're all kind of wearing flamingo feathered headpieces and tails, and they dance to bring joy back to the world that's kind of heading into darkness. And I remember sitting here going, okay, I've gone from really liking this character to now feeling a little bit kind of like, are we the joke? Is this a joke? And throughout the whole thing, as a character, we learn that his father was quite a highly respected knight. And he had all these grand ideas and designs for his son to follow in those footsteps. And all his son wanted to be was a performer. He eventually runs away from home. They never use the word, and if they did, I completely missed it. But they never use, queer or homosexual or gay. But it's very much inferred, and it's inferred through a lot of what I would consider kind of laziness. And then, like Rick was kind of saying, that I was like, am I now? Am I deflecting some elements of myself that I'm not 100%, happy with, or I'm embarrassed by? Because I know I can be, I know I can be campy. I know I can be loud. That's not all I am. That's not the whole part of it. But there's elements to me, and I have been shamed for that. I've and not by Tempest, for the record, but I genuinely, like, your comments haven't even, they haven't upset or offended me. I've been told to shut up. I've been told to tone it down, and not by homophobic people, by family. You know what I mean? And to play it down a little bit. And I saw that in that character, and I went, I kind of, after finishing the game, and I thought I finished that game 10 times, it has the worst narrative structure ever. Like, oh, it's over. No, wait, there's more. Okay, I have to keep playing. That happens a lot in Dragon Quest 11. But I actually ended up putting Sylvando in my main party, even though I absolutely hated his combat and his abilities. But I was like, you know what? This guy there's a little bit of me in him, and if the designers put it in there as a joke, and I don't think they did, I don't think, I have chosen to take him and kind of give him a little bit of icon status, or because I went from kind of going, I don't hate him because I don't hate myself, and I hate him because his movesets were terrible and I didn't really like his stats, but that's besides the point. You know what I mean? I wanted to take that, and I wanted to allow myself, take the joke and own it. It's even, we've been using the word queer and queerness. That's often used to deride, dismiss, and mock us. And yet the four of us are sitting here, quite openly and proudly talking about this thing, and no one's sitting there kind of irking or, looking over their shoulder, with that word, because we've taken the power that was used against us. And Tempest, as you were saying earlier, that idea of subversion, you don't own that word. Right. That is our word. These are our identities, and these are our stories.
Right.
Bye-bye. I'll stop talking now. Sorry, I feel like
Well, to bring back what everyone is saying to the idea of kind of tabletop games, right? Let's say that, like, it's probably not 100%, but nearly 100% tabletop role-playing games are storytelling games of some format. There is a story being told. And as for kind of what Roll for Felicity was saying and the kind of things we've all brought in, it's kind of like, what is the intention of your story? If the intention of your story is to be a camp laugh and it's a one-shot, one-pager game everyone plays during Pride weekend and gets drunk, that's the one where you put all of the ridiculously overblown characters, right? And that's fine. And then there's an element to this, to kind of Roll for Felicity was talking about, like, doing it subtly. If you really want like a long, heartfelt campaign where a character realizes they're gay, they come out, everyone accepts them, it's beautiful, it's like a, you know, because that is something that some people don't get to experience in real life, unfortunately, because the world is not always kind to LGBTQ plus people, then that's okay too. I just would say that, like, the main thing is, why are you creating this story? What is your intention with your queer representation in this story? And if you don't have a full-blown idea for what to do with your queer representation, just make it up front and make your world safe for the queer people in it. It's like, that's, I feel like that's the baseline. Yeah. And then you can start doing these building blocks of, well, am I going to make it overblown and ridiculous and make it like every episode of RuPaul's Drag Race ever put in a blender and made into a smoothie and my players are drinking it vibes? And it's just camp, fun, ridiculous, high energy. Am I going to make some heartbreaking story about a queer couple torn asunder and know what tropes I'm playing into? You know I'm playing into a kill your gays trope because that's what my players want and they will love that and that will be really important to them. Then cool, then you can start building more about what you might want. But I think it's always good to have that thought process when you're first either designing a game, writing an adventure, creating an NPC, like, what is my intention with making this person queer? And if my intention is, aren't gay people funny? Don't do it! That's not cool!
You've just reminded me of something that now I'm feeling super guilty about because I mentioned earlier that in the D&D adventure that I made that was based in Kinda, which is my my setting that I'm working on. I wrote in a gay couple because it felt natural, and that was my first experience of realizing that give her a second. Excellent.
Hello, sorry. I was horribly backlit. I needed to go close my blinds. Thank you.
So when I wrote my first D&D adventure, it was based in Kinda, and I just sort of like naturally wrote in this gay character, and that's when I realized that the rest of my setting was cishet, and I was like, if only because I hadn't decided it was otherwise. I'm realizing that the way I wrote this gay couple, they're an older couple, and to me it was that romantic, like, I find there to be some romanticism about older gay couples. There's just something about it that I find adorable and romantic and lovely and sweet. And so I was really pleased with this gay couple that I'd written into it. But as I mentioned earlier, one of the partners was dying. And one of the themes of the whole campaign is actually plague. There's a magical plague, and that's huge spoilers for the game.
I won't tell.
Thank you. And I'm just realizing now, for some weird god-awful reason, it's been over a year now, and I'm just realizing now that touches heavily onto AIDS and the stories of gay couples. It's a thing that you see a lot. It's a trope that's really common in queer narratives, is of one gay partner watching another one die of disease. And whereas this character isn't necessarily diseased, they'd had a stroke, and that's why they were dying. It touches on that. And that is something that now, like, I need to go jot down in my notes and say, to remind myself, this is a possible interpretation of what's going on especially when the players will eventually realize that there's actual disease in this world. Something to be very sensitive about. So I guess that's to say that you're not always going to notice all of the things that you need to notice about your story and about your queer narratives. And possibly even a reminder, again, have somebody else read it, get other eyes on it. You shouldn't have to be responsible for perfectly telling the story in a way that isn't going to harm anyone. Because we're all fallible creatures.
Nobody is born woke. We're born silly little goo goo gaga babies, and the rest is all learned behavior, etc., etc. Like, I worry that people really, really beat themselves up when they make minor mistakes that then people notice. And like, if you've done everything with absolute kindness in your heart and try to research and learn, but ultimately missed something, that's okay. You just go fix it. It's cool. I make mistakes all the time.
I find it quite interesting. Zuktoboy's comments, falling prey to those patterns and tropes is to be expected when a lot of these narratives have been internalized. And Tempest, as you were, describing that elderly gay couple, and then you said one of them was sick. No word of a lie. I was like, in my head, I started running through kind of a Rolodex of queer stories and characters where, I bet you it's AIDS. Like, it's the first place I went to, because those are the stories we get. Those are the stories we're allowed to see. And even when you were saying, this romanticized idea of an elderly gay couple, it's because we're programmed. We internal and people kind of assume that, that's just TV or whatever like that. That's just a movie. That's just whatever. That's just a video game. We don't see, often in mainstream pop culture or whatever you want to call it, a queer couple that lasts. It's
happy
always
long-term.
Tragic.
Yeah.
It's tragic. Oh, there's adultery. There's sickness. There's internalized homophobia. There's no happy queer story couples. And even if you look at something like Grace and Frankie, where they're two prominent actors play a now gay couple, they didn't get together. They were having a horrible affair behind their wives' backs. Yeah. And then they get together, divorcing their wives, and then they have a relationship. And you're like, oh well, good. You're like, are we meant to feel like? How do we feel about that? That it's this idea that we, as queer people, outside our space, outside our community, that we have this reality that our stories aren't often portrayed positively, or even respectively, or respectfully rather, that it is those tropes, and then we tend to take a lot of that in, consciously or subconsciously, about ourselves, and have it play out in our lives, have it play out in our content, our stories, our adventures, whatever it might be. And like Zuktoboy was saying, that is something that we then as queer designers need to be very much vigilant of. That it isn't and if you want to play kill, I was gonna say kill all the gays, but kill the gay. Don't play that game.
My vote for president right here.
It's Highlander rules.
When you want to see that game now, what do you kill all the gays look like?
We're literally going to be doing Highlander rules. There can be
only one.
I'm the first to go. But it is, what was my point? Effectively, that if you want to have a tragic moment in your story, with a queer element, queer characters, whatever it might be in it, that's fine. But ask yourself where that's coming from. Is it integral to the story and the narrative and so on and so forth? Or are you putting it out there because that's the tried and tested method? Like, is that this thing that everybody will just accept? Because, you know, that's what we see all the time.
Yeah. If you want to be edgy and bold, give your gay characters a happy ending. They'll be like, wow, literally never seen this
Make
before.
them
Damn.
boring. Make them so boring.
And also, just kind of to bounce off what Declan was saying as well, that like in character design, so if you're a player and you're designing characters, you're making an edgy rogue. Let's go for the very base standard. Edgy rogue, entire family dead, raised in an orphanage, thrown out the orphanage, became a thief, and your character also happens to be gay. That's like very different, right? Because that's very, I'm making my stereotypical edgy rogue, they just also happen to be gay.
Yeah.
Versus, oh, a lot of this has happened and they can't have a happy life because I've internalized you know, from watching so many movies about so many hard-hitting things that have happened to queer communities, that like, oh, I'm intentionally sabotaging my gay character. You know, if you can have that separation, that's really good.
That makes me think of my precious Strick, who who's my character in one of Rick's games. And he has a tragic backstory. He's actually immortal. And he became immortal when his family did a dark druidic ritual on him to make him live until the family's house could be resurrected in the future, because it was being, you know, destroyed and whatnot. And so he spent 100-odd years. His pronouns are they, them, but I have certain internal ideas of who this character is, that sometimes pop through, and it's very annoying. They lived as a hermit in the deep, dark woods for over 100 years, only coming out in their cougar form, to meet people. So they had this mythology around them, but they were very much alone. And then there were omens, and they never liked their family. They didn't like the responsibility of having to resurrect their family, and over time they actually started to lose their memory, and the only thing they really had left was, there's a thing you have to do, and when the omens are right, you have to get up and you have to do it. And the omens are what brought them into adventuring. And so the omens happened, and then we had a new character join. And this character, Traherne, who's played by a friend of ours called Pascal. And in the background, Pascal and I plotted to make this game as gay as possible via our characters.
You didn't tell me that.
I thought you knew.
I have no idea.
Yes, we have our own gay agenda. It's the sub-gay agenda. It's the... But Pascal and I just decided how great would it be if, you know, we were all queer for each other. And so we've plotted for a really long time, and very subtly we started like adding in, which is ironic because for us it's months, right? But for these characters it's only a matter of days. So probably actually, if you watched it in a film, it would have happened like really quick. But to us, it lasts as long as we could hold ourselves back, really. But we just kept adding in like little bits of these characters are, you know, blushing when they look at each other, or can't look at the other person, or like finally it escalated to whenever my character was in a cat form, they would like, especially the house cat form, they would like rub Traherne's legs. And then I think we've gotten to the point where my character has like, you know, adjusted Traherne's fringe.
Yeah, but you see, this has gone zoom over my head as a DM. Like, how do you have queer representation when the person running the game is completely oblivious to everything that's going on around him? Yeah.
But what I love about it is that this character, they have a really tragic backstory, and they have a very big, like, epic purpose to their narrative. And it's not one that brings them happiness, and that the one thing that will very likely bring them happiness is this random person that they found in a cage in a bandit camp. And that it's just, there's nothing spectacular about it. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm doing this wild, dangerous, epic thing, and oh, he's cute. You know. And I'm interested to see how these two characters like manage all of the epicness and the danger and the, you know, potential, the ship for each other on the side.
I also just wanted to loop back before we lose track of this thread of conversation, because this came about because I said separating tragedy from queerness and understanding why you've separated it is like maybe a better way to go about it. But I think Rick was going to say something. I was curious to know what it was going to be.
I can't remember what I was going to say.
Only because I've been thinking about it for the last 5 minutes. I was like, actually, if you separate your tragedy from your game, you still make all of your games tragic. You're just still doing the trope anyway, and intention doesn't matter ultimately once everything's perceived in the end. I haven't phrased it once really well.
But if we're playing D&D, all the characters are tragic. That is just the trope of D&D. It's not necessarily because they're queer.
Yeah.
I think it's always being again, this is self-conscious trap. How do we avoid it? Like, we're saying that tragic gay stories where one gay husbands, one of them's dying of an illness, they have to watch them die. Yes, it's a trope. Mm-hmm. But should we be ashamed of that? Should we be suspicious of that? It is our story. That's one of many queer stories to tell, but those are our stories to tell. And like the Grace and whatever Frankie is a terrible piece of pandering and has terrible representation, but then is that again because of who's telling the story? It's obviously being told by cis-het people for a straight audience. For an older straight audience, for boomers. Yeah, and to put them at ease in the situation.
But I think that's vital when it comes to queer design and content, is that who is this for? Who, again, like Prue was saying, there is a big difference in us sitting around a table in June with and Tempest, I know you like cider, so you can have cider, but I don't know, Rick, I'm Prue, if you drink either, but sitting around with, like, you know, drinks, and you know, we're DMing a D&D adventure where, you know, where the dragon is, like, you know, real sassy and like really going hard into that, like, you know, it's not just, they're not just hoarding treasure, you know, darling, they're hoarding looks and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And we can sit there and we can enjoy that and we can have fun and be comfortable, you know, in that moment, because for us, it's not about respect. These are the things that we're kind of lambasted with, and in a way, we're kind of taking ownership of those things and enjoying them at our own, in our own spaces. The difference is, and it's like Rick was saying with the likes of Grace and Frankie, is it isn't for us, and we are like Felicity was kind of saying earlier on, that it's that kind of, it's that who is this being aimed at? What's the aspect here that we're not quite getting? And it's when we're the butt of the joke, or our experiences or our stories are brought to light, not because it's important to tell them, but because, well, you know, we can put a nice soft lens around that now, and it'll look really sweet and really wholesome. And sure, look, aren't all gay people, queer people, aren't they all just lovely?
We are.
Yeah, we are. Even
What?
when we're not. Even when we're not being lovely.
Okay. It's my evil but nice. Got it. Okay. I
From my
was
personal
very
experience,
confused for a
that is
second.
definitely not true.
I was like, sorry, what? Lovely. But yeah, we have to kind of look at if it's not created through or by a queer person, what then is the motivation for telling that story, and what does that story draw on? And for the record, it's not about kind of gatekeeping. It comes back to that kind of that respect element again, that that you treat those narratives, those characters, those stories with respect.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's touch on something a little bit more strictly design related. Prue, you had a really good example of that trans mask character who is the leather gay, and and you mentioned thinking then about like fun ways that we can design our queer characters and our NPCs. Do you have any examples of characters that you found particularly fun in your games?
Oh, my NPCs are gay. I'll go into all of them if you want. I though on like, not just me being silly and listing off all of the cute queer couples I've got brewing in the backgrounds of all of my games, I think it can be very fun to make the obvious queer character that maybe a group of like an exceedingly queer table would be like, that's a bit much, but most other people wouldn't clock it, kind of thing, if you know what I mean. But I don't know if saying if you know what I mean at a round table is a very helpful thing to say. But I will go with some examples, because then what you can do is build more than just that, right? So you can build like the cool, sexy, buxom, orcish drag queen who is camp as all heck. But then you can give her like lots of other features. And for me, that's the fun way to design those NPCs. Like, they're more than just the quick, obvious slap of representation I've given, but also that fun, like, tongue-in-cheek, here's a cool thing about them. I also really enjoy being able to do that. I enjoy making lesbians who pine, and very camp twinkie gay men, and NBs who are like gorgeously androgynous, which is just pretty, I just want to say that's pretty like par for the course. There's nothing like in that's like, oh, these are like really diverting from tropes. But what I do is then they have more than just that. They aren't just that. And I find that a really fun way of like mechanically creating something queer and tangible and fun in a game.
Okay,
I don't know if that was a helpful thing to say.
I'm going to be really rude. I just realized that I brought up a slightly new topic, but we haven't taken a break yet. And I promised Declan a 5-minute break at some point in this.
Hey, there's a reason why you promised me a 5-minute break.
Because I would need it. That's why. Because I need it.
I was waiting for the bouncing.
Not there yet, but I would like to get through a single stream without that being an issue. So this will be my attempt. So we're going to take 5 minutes to stretch and have a wee, and we will be right back. Boop. Hi, we are back. We have stretched, we have watered, we have weed. Good for us.
I got a drink, like a healthy beverage.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Don't forget to do the same.
Hydrated.
Sip and stretch. Oh, that actually felt really good. So yes, we were talking about fun ways to design queer characters and NPCs. Does anybody else have any good examples or tricks?
I just wanted to do one more about my ones, if I can. And it is that in my game, I, as a queer person, can just make people I fancy. It's a really good one. Because other queer people will fancy me
I love
too.
that.
I made this huge, muscular woman who's captain of my ship, and she's a gunslinger, but guns are illegal, and she's a... Everyone keeps calling her a pirate. I'm like, she has literally never said she's a pirate. There's nothing to imply that she's a pirate on this ship. She's a pirate. She is. Like, I did the implication well enough, but she legit has never like.
I already want to date this character. So
and she has an ex-girlfriend who is this divination wizard they sometimes go and visit, who reads fortunes in eggs. That's like her thing. She loves chickens. She collects chickens. She has a cockatrice that she thought was a chicken, and now it's a cockatrice. It's a whole thing. She's just a little sweetie, but she's this strawberry blonde, slightly manic energy, really invested in like learning more, and like really invested in every conversation she's in character. She's that character's ex-girlfriend. And then the character who's employed them all is strawberry blonde wizard woman who is very focused and slight manic energy, and the captain. I left the NPCs that run this ship alone in case anyone wanted to flirt with them. After a couple sessions, clearly none of the players were interested. So I was like, cool, that means I can get the captain together with the wizard lady. And I hadn't realized I'd done it until I did it. And then I was like, wait, I've given this captain a type. Her type is like strawberry blonde, cute femme wizard women who are like a little bit manic and a little bit hyper focused. And I think that now is a lesson I've like learned for myself, that it's really nice to create. If you're going to create a character who is going to actively be seen romancing other characters, give them a type, because that's really fun to play with.
Oh, I was basically just going to say you gave her you as her type.
Oh, well, maybe. Yeah.
I thought that's what you were trying to get at, actually.
I have only been this colour for like a week.
I love it, by the way. Do not ever go back to any other color.
I really like this like peachy color I've got. Yeah, but you know, it wasn't intentional, and they are much nicer than me. I'm not regretful of this, but I am a bit of a bitchy person. I enjoy it. I'd be a very good contestant on reality television, I think. But like, you know, I'm often make my little sweet wizard NPCs like, oh, they wouldn't hurt a fly, and I'm like, well, they need a bit more. They need a bit more.
Do you know what? I think that's the best piece of advice we're ever going to come up with, is write the queer characters that you want to date.
Yeah.
What about you, Declan?
Or one of your players wants to date. If that's the case.
Oh yeah, that's the best, is setting up ships for your players without them knowing it. I bet Declan can talk about this. Come on, I see it.
It's in the name of the show.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of characters, there is one that I'd like to kind of come back to, and it does speak a good bit to kind of what Prue was saying. But I have two that I have fallen in love with, and it's not that I want to date them, but it's like I want to hang out with you. I want to smoke cigarettes, and I want to talk crap, and I want to be gossipy and bitchy and just enjoy myself with you, and just, for fun. And it was with a group of people who I know them. I knew that they would respond quite well to it. But in one of those little pre-made adventure things, there is a green dragon that the players may encounter on their journey. And I was like, oh, green dragons, they're poison. And I was like, what's another word for poison? Toxic. And his name was Bruno. And Bruno was the evilest, cattiest, toxic green dragon you ever encountered with. He would only deal with the Dragonborn, because it wasn't because it was like, he was like, I refuse to speak common. It was 100%. And he was like, will we do something mean to the other ones? Will we just be like a load of fun? And the Dragonborn, I think the Dragonborn was a paladin. And the paladin was like, no, please, they're my friends. It was like if Regina George was a toxic green dragon named Bruno. It was just so much fun getting to play that, and like the player didn't get like it wasn't, they didn't get wrapped up in the bitchiness and the cattiness. They were like, no, my character doesn't do that, but you knock yourself, and they ended up becoming like besties. And rather than having to fight, because they were like, oh my god, there's a dragon, oh god, there's a dragon. The Dragonborn went in and kind of like, you need to go, you need to find your ex, and you need to sort your stuff out, and you need to get your hoard out of his apartment, and live your life, kind of a thing. And Bruno left without a fight, and they were like, what the hell did you do? And what was kind of left of their hoard in that little tower that they're in. Prue mentioned drag queens as characters, and I have one that was a running NPC in Romance in the Dungeon Season 1, aptly titled Eve Ville, and it was basically me. Like I left Eve's description fairly vague, because I really like people to kind of, when you read the book, you infer kind of, if I've given you a few adjectives, you still get to create that character in your mind. And I kind of described Eve as a short, middle-aged-ish, bearish queen. And I was like, that's me. I love it. And she, like, wherever she went, she sauntered in, and like she usually just sauntered into Hephaestus' life and ruined it. Or I just sauntered into Amber's life and just ruined it for her. And I was like, hi, Amber. And I've loved those aspects of myself, that it's such a fun way to do it. But there's one character that has really stood out for me, and that is, again, she's in Season 1 and Season 2 of Romance in the Dungeon, Dahlia Wolfram. And Dahlia is this very mixed up, young, spoiled tiefling girl who is daddy's princess, bit of a Valley Girl vibe off of her, only kind of dated Hephaestus because she thought it would shock her father, and like, look at me, I'm possibly maybe bisexual, or I'm maybe doing it for attention, don't you dare question me, or I will scream the bloody house down kind of aspect to her. And I thought Dahlia would pop in, mess some stuff up, and pop out, and away we go with it. And we were talking about creating characters, that you want to date. Hephaestus dated Dahlia, then ghosted her in the same way she got ghosted by Nate. So the cycle of hate repeats itself. And Dahlia is a little not happy with it. And it's so fun because there's a part of Dahlia, we were talking about working through stuff, and not to bring up the trauma aspect or the baggage aspect, but there's a lot in Dahlia's background and backstory that I have and that I bring to her. That's my own story. Things that she does and the way she acts and behaves are often things that I wish I could have done, but I'm not that person. So getting to be her and play her and again, her sexuality is fairly vague. I mean, she thinks she's goth now, because she bought the clothes, and that's all. Like, she doesn't understand who she is herself, and that's really fun to play, because I like to think I know who I am, and then occasionally I'm like, oh, hang on a second, that's new. I'm 35 and I'm still learning about myself.
Yeah. And
it's been really fun to kind of put that into a character like Dahlia, a young 20-year-old tiefling Valley girl who, like, I don't know if people listen to the show, but like in her episode, it was so much fun getting to vibe off of Hephaestus and Amber. For me, it was like, wow, I kind of feel like transposed in that moment. I'm like, wow, what was that? Like, where did that come from? And I've enjoyed kind of bringing her to life. I'm getting to tell her story indirectly, and sometimes directly, and sometimes with a dagger.
I honestly, I think that's equally good bit of advice, is to take parts of yourself that you kind of almost wish were a little bit more than they are in you, and make that a character. That's really good.
I just want to slide a word of caution in there, though, only because the character I've played longest term ever, who I adore. She's called Hope. Her full title is Lady Hope Summerhold. Yes, she was made a lady twice. And she was Daddy's spoiled little brat. I was like, I'm making Paris Hilton, and I'm making her a sorcerer. She is a bimbo who is secretly intelligent and can destroy you with her words. That's who she is. And I loved her, and I loved everything about her. And sometimes it would genuinely hurt my feelings when my party mates didn't like her.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the problem, right? With that is like, I was like, I wish I was a little more willing to be like, bitchy, to cut people down, to stand up for things, to just say these things. I'm like, sure, it's a role-playing game. Some of the situations you get yourself in, you flub, you say bad words, your partner's like, don't do that. That's cool. I'm fine with that. And I've also made my peace with Hope, and I ended up retiring her from the campaign anyway. And my party mates do really genuinely like her, and so it's all fine. But there was quite a while where I was like, wow, everyone just thinks I'm a horrible bimbo. And they don't trust me, and that hurt me because I had invested so much of who I wanted to be into this really hot bisexual Paris Hilton-y character who was going out with like the muscle princess of the realm. And so then when people are like, oh, we don't really like her that much, I was like, ow, my heart.
This I want to go back to your bit, Declan, about the dynamic between your like bitchy characters being really close friends with your like, you know, more quiet or kinder characters. Because I absolutely I heart that dynamic so much. And that's probably because you could probably describe all of my favorite relationships that way. In myself, all of my personal favorite relationships, the other person is generally quite bitchy. And or has a lot of bitchy qualities.
I'm absolutely I'm here for this 3 hours because all Tempest has done is just spill tea everywhere, like about her game, about her relationship. I'm here for this.
But yes, but also like part of the reason I love that about my relationships is that it's something that I admire in the other person in that relationship. But at the same time, you know, I like to think that they admire my kindness while at the same time desperately trying to drag me into joining their bitchiness. But as far as this particular topic in the design, I think this highlights the idea of contrasts. That one way to bring out characters in general, things that you want to express in your writing, is to use contrasts as a way of emphasizing them. So if you want a character to appear queer, then put them next to a character that's really, really straight. If you want a character to appear bitchy, put them next to a really kind character. That's just a general bit of writing advice that works and is super good.
I was just thinking, because I don't really have a lot of queer characters in my work, because obviously, as I said earlier, I'm a bit self-conscious about it, but I realised I did recently put one in, which I think is a really good trope, which is obviously queer is a bit subversive. We generally tend to be the ones looking in rather than looking out. So you can have the sort of capable, world-weary, cynical character who can see things as they really are. That's quite a fun one to do. But that's all I got.
Okay. So for our last half an hour, I thought, because we've done a lot of the sort of really broad, fun kind of stuff. We touched a little bit on some serious subjects. I knew that we weren't going to get through a whole list of stuff that we kind of wanted to cover. I do expect that we'll be doing another episode of this show on the queer topic. But let's touch a little bit on some more serious stuff if we can. do we have any tips or examples for how we've been able to touch on difficult subjects, but in a really sensitive way? How to be gentle and kind and not avoid serious things? Or should we avoid serious things?
I would just want to preface this discussion, and I think everyone here would be in agreement anyway, that this is absolutely a discussion you have. If this is a table you're bringing it to, you have that discussion with your table.
Yeah.
I would like to approach this during the game, and I would like this to be something we explore together, and I want to do so safely. And if you're writing a game, I think it's always nice to put that in a preface at the beginning. Like, I have a game that I wrote that's not even it's a couple pages. Each page is a track on an album. It's a journaling game. But at the beginning, it's not even that you'll have an experience relating to gender or sexuality in the game. I've set it up that you potentially can, but it's not even. And at the beginning, I was like, just be careful if you're playing this game and you're not comfortable thinking mindfully about gender and sexuality. Don't play the game. But I just felt it was worth saying, if you're watching this roundtable and you want to go and do something tough, make sure you have that discussion from a safety perspective before you go and do the tough thing. Springing a transphobia plotline on a genderqueer table, nope, don't do it. Don't spring it.
Yeah.
Approach it when you can tastefully. But as for tough subjects, that's an odd one for me because I often try and just avoid it. I try and make my worlds as joyfully queer as possible. I don't actually have much confidence in making it hard because the real world is hard, and I watch my friends struggle day in, day out. And if they want to come to my table and be like, I want to make my parents in D&D transphobic, I'm like, I can't make that space for you because I would have to roleplay their parents, for example. Like, no.
Yeah, I think as a general policy, transphobia and homophobia are no-nos in the same way that racism is generally a no-no. And that's simply because we're all unfortunately traumatized beings in some way or another because of our sexuality and gender identities and potentially any number of other things. And some of us have the spoons to deal with that, and some of us want to process that and it's cathartic for them, and some of us just don't have the spoons. Prue, you were gonna say something?
Oh, no, I was just like in agreement, okay. Yeah, and I was going to say, like, some people are like, oh, I have the spoons, but not here, in therapy, please, not at my game table.
Yeah. And that includes, for me in particular, discussion of pronouns. And all of my games, the one boundary that I have is our characters will not discuss pronouns. They will just use them correctly. It's not a what are you? You can say what are your pronouns. That's cool because that's how we should all approach that in normal everyday life. But do not misgender my characters. Just full stop. Don't make it a discussion that my pronouns don't align with your expectations. That's not a discussion. That's not a part of my game.
Yeah. And then because I jumped in at the beginning of it, and I want to bring it back around to the question you asked, rather than just derailing everything. I'm sorry. And how you can handle these things sensitively is the way I have occasionally had it happen. Is that I have had trans players come to my table, people who are at least intending to significantly transition across. Let's, for the sake of me being able to consider gender as a spectrum, they've at least wanted to move significantly in one direction either way down that spectrum, who have made characters that are a guised version of that, and therefore we're not having to handle transness front on. And I will give you 2 examples that I have, because they're genuinely, I think, very impressive examples. I had someone whose family had been cursed to, the first boy born in your family will be a devil. And there had been just generations of women being born to this family line. Mm-hmm. And then this character hit puberty and started growing horns. And this character was like, oh, I'm a guy.
That's
shit.
cool.
And then ran away from home because they thought they'd be judged for being a tiefling, not because they were worried about their parents' response. And so that was a way that, through a lens that adds a level of like safety and distance from that story, we could explore it. And then we had another person that had something very similar, that was like a Fire Ganassi plot line.
Yeah.
That like they were from an ordinary family, and then they got exposed to something in early age that caused them to transform, and it put their life in danger. And so their family were like, because of your life being in danger, go out into the world, go adventuring. It's not safe for you to stay in this village, which you could see as like an allegory for maybe a queer story. So there's ways you can put these like subtle things
that if it in not to squee over some media, which is potentially controversial in itself, but your tiefling reminds me of a character in the television show Supergirl. She's got, the character is called like the Dreamer or something like that, and the story is actually, this is a power that that is passed down in the women of their family, and the character is actually a trans woman, and so there were only 2 children in this family, her and her older sister. So her older sister assumed that she would end up with family powers, and it's in a way a confirmation of her transness, the fact that she has the powers that her family passes down to women. And I think it's really beautiful, even in the fact that her sister actually resents her because of this. I think it's just a really honest portrayal of those kinds of situations, in the way that we sometimes don't realize things about ourselves until something as powerful as growing horns, as unavoidable as growing horns, until we experience those things. And then sometimes our family doesn't truly, our family and our friends and people who are close to us don't truly realize our identities until they have a similar kind of experience where like it just clicks for them. Maybe you just have a particular conversation that they identify with the identity that you've been expressing to them all along, and that they rejected until they had a connection with you. And I think I think that you can discuss these. You can have characters who resent their trans siblings for things, that resent that someone's transness. You can have that, and I think almost depending on the tone of your game, it's dishonest not to have that. But if you want to be sensitive about it, you've got to really look at what that story is. You got to get intimate with it. You have to be honest about it. You can't just be like, you can't do stereotypes if you're going to have any kind of that darker side of queerness, I think, personally.
I think as well, a good thing is to be player-led about this stuff. Like, you can look at your players' backgrounds and things like that and sort of get a feel for the kind of stories they want to tell, and that can let you, and if you're letting them lead you, then they'll take you to a safe place, and then you can sort of.
So I want to ask you then, how are you going to cope with our gay romance in your grimdark game?
You've literally only told me 2 hours ago, and I haven't had any.
You have been
yet,
confronted with this before. We've definitely admitted to you before.
I don't know. Well, again, it's player-led thing. It's not like I'm going to see what you want to do and put the kind of problems that you want to confront, rather than
absolutely.
For example, put some horrible plot line that I think is going to be good.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely that. I think that brings this, what I was just saying, into a little bit more focus, because you have a grimdark game. It's not a big celebration of queerness. It's not fun and silly. I mean, it's fun, but it's grimdark. It's serious. Bad things happen to good people. There's a lot of failure and a lot of, body horror nowadays. Rick reads one book about body horror and then suddenly it's everywhere.
Good for you, Rick. I love body horror. I got offered to play a game of Vampire the Masquerade, having never played the system before, found the Semiche book and was like, I'm playing the vampires that rend flesh. Please. Yes.
Thank you for
honestly,
the follow.
I never intended it to be about body horror, and then all of a sudden all this body horror is suddenly coming out my mouth, and I'm like, oh, I didn't intend it. But you're right, like, you've got to be careful with grimdark, and like, it's dark, the players experience problems, but I never let the problems be like prejudice, or things like that. They're going to trigger them. They're always about other horrible stuff, but
I mean, I think personally, it might not be a good idea in that particular game to surround the conflict, to center the conflict on the gayness in these characters so much as just challenge the relationship. Bring in other people who challenge the relationship or challenge the identities maybe a little bit, but have some adventure, something happens that maybe drives a wedge between them, like they disagree on something. I think those are good ways to remain grimdark and still tell the story of that relationship.
Yeah.
And that's just center of it, really, is you're just talking about relationships, aren't you?
I was going to say, on the flip side of this discussion as well, is that, like, as I was saying, I'm not someone who can or is willing to explore like a lot of very tough plot lines. Mm-hmm. And so on the like counterpoint to this, I will go back to that tiefling who, realized as he hit puberty his true gender identity and like ran away from home. That character has never decided to go home in the game. If that character decides to go home, his family are going to be like, why did you run away? We love you. Come back. Yeah. Like, well, you don't have to come back if you were enjoying being out adventuring, but like, we love you. It's fine. And I think there's a space, that's also a tough topic though, in a way. Like as we were saying, queer people don't always get happy endings. Creating a happy ending is also, can be like really heartrending and tough and lovely. And it might really create beautiful gameplay or game moments as well. The tough topics in queer culture can be benevolent ones as much as they are malevolent ones, I think.
You mentioned in our notes, Prue, Alice is Missing has a character.
Yeah, Alice is Missing is inherently gay, and This is something I really wanted to talk about. So, Alice is Missing is a game made by Spencer Stark. That has when was it released? Like maybe 2 years ago now. And it's a card-based role-playing game where you get cards that describe your character, they describe your motive, and your friend Alice has gone missing, and you draw cards and respond to the prompts on those cards over the course of 90 minutes. It's a silent game. You sit there texting each other. It's very good if you want to explore loss and helplessness and being a teenager who has potentially had the worst thing you can imagine happening to a friend happen to a friend. And one of the characters that you draw straight away is Julia, Alice's secret girlfriend. And And you know, I always run that game as you can change the genders of these characters if you want. Because, you know, I've played with lots of different people. Like, I've played with cishet people like, oh, I'm not comfortable doing a secret queer romance. Please don't make me do that. And completely get that. That's cool. They can swap Julia out if they want. But I really like it when people keep Julia in, because it's potentially these two teenagers exploring their first queer relationship, and it's secret for some reason. The game does not demand you to say why it's secret, and in most of my games I've played with queer people who don't want homophobia to be the reason it's secret. Instead, it's often secret because Alex has great grades and Julie has rubbish grades, and they're really worried people will like make fun of them, or they're in different cliques, or like one of their parents considers the other a bad influence, and they like separate it from gender. But it does mean that if you really want to in that game, you can explore homophobia, because it's set in a small town in America. And I like that, because often I put a line in that game as extreme homophobia. Like, if Julia and Alice come out over the course of our 90-minute gameplay, and you want to be like, oh, I never knew you were gay, and be a bit shirty about it, that's fine. If you're going to bring slurs to the game, you can do one. I'm not interested. That's not the game I want to play. And I think that is a really, you know, that game is a really good setting in which to explore that. And that is hard. Like, potentially your first queer relationship has fallen apart because your partner's gone missing and you need to find her, and you have to like, it's really intense, because I've played the role of Julia in this game before, because you have to be really invested in finding your girlfriend, and everyone's like, why are you so obsessed with her? Yeah. Why are you so invested in finding this girl? She's not even like that close a friend of yours, and you have to be like, she's my girlfriend. I love her. That's why I want to find her. And so there are games in which to do that. I think it really depends on the system. I think often those very heartfelt indie games are much more the space to do that in. Yeah. Because I don't know if I've played a system that has a big chunky core rulebook that's worth, you know, more than £20 or so, where I'd be comfortable doing it. Like, I wouldn't be comfortable doing it in Vampires. I wouldn't be comfortable doing it in Warhammer. I wouldn't be comfortable doing it in D&D. But like,
it's just not the game that you're playing, is it?
I think, yeah, and games like Monster Hearts and Thirsty Sword Lesbians have like strings and things and relationship mechanics and stuff. Yeah. So there are different systems where you can explore these things safely. I think the reason Alice is Missing also works so well is it's 90 minutes, and at the end of the 90 minutes, they force you to decompress and separate yourself from your character. So you at least have that space. You're not moving from session to session knowing that there's more closeted homophobia around the corner.
That's an interesting way of putting difficult storylines, is a sort of pull mechanic rather than a push mechanic. Like, you don't say that you have to play something a certain way, you just leave the possibility there. And if the players want to pull that into their story, then you let them. You don't push that onto them and say, well, this guy's a homophobe or whatever. So, although I'm going to be very naughty and will actually this, because I've been thinking about if we talk about other games that are queer, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Blue Rose. No. So Blue Rose, actually, interestingly, I don't know if I should talk about this, because I might, no, let's talk about something else. It's going to be like really...
I mean, at least tell us why we shouldn't be talking about it.
Well, it kind of is related in that this discussion's been had before around Blue Rose. And in fact, some of the problems we have with the OSR movement today were actually started with a discussion on the queerness of Blue Rose. A certain person, who I'm not going to name, sort of came out of that movement, still quite active today, saying some quite nasty things. So this isn't actually the first time we've had a discussion about this. And in fact, you could sort of argue that this whole discussion is pretty core to the role-playing industry. Like, a lot of the right-wing OSR people fell out with mainstream role-playing culture because of this particular issue.
I think this goes back to us talking about subcultures and how D&D and queerness are intertwined in that they're drawn to each other because of their history as subcultures. And that when you have subcultures drawn together, the problem that these two subcultures, the stereotype of D&D and TTRPGs is the grognard, and that's like oil to queerness is water, and it causes all of this conflict. And then also that reminds me of another thing I'd said, which was about basically you're going to have, in many cases, you're going to have to pick a side of the argument.
Interestingly, there is a brand of role-playing games where subversiveness and queerness was always at its center, which is The World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade, things like that were incredibly, well, not incredibly, but they were considered subversive at the time, and there was a lot of queerness in the text and stuff like that. So we do belong.
Yeah, absolutely. And just by trying to make queer games, you're already picking a side in an argument that has existed for a really long time between gamers.
If you're going to design a hobby where you get to pretend to be anyone who you want and the entire trope of the hobby is found family, you're going to get so many gays in the hobby. Sorry.
Oh, so many gays. So many gays. It was just begging for gays all along, to be honest. It really was.
The gay to fantasy pipeline is pretty high. Sorry,
no, go ahead.
That sounded really obscene when I said it out loud. Sorry, but anyway.
There's this point here about drawing inspiration from other queer media, learning lessons from other creators and letting their influence and process guide us. Was that you point, Declan?
Yeah, I even going back to Rick and that one book on body horror. You know what I mean? I like it's funny, but like even last night, one of my players was like, "Wow, you described that really like an anime," and I was like, "I've been watching way too much anime today." I was like, "What?" Yeah. So we are, as creators, we are very much influenced by what we see, what we experience, and what we feel, and so on and so forth. And I think looking at what other queer people are doing. And, we see things that we don't like, and we're like, I don't want that in my game. I don't want that in my story. I don't want that in my characters, so on and so forth. We should also look at what is being doing and is being done very, very well. And, how you can tell queer stories. For me, and I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but for me, talking about, bringing all the gays to the yard, but like Rebecca Sugar's Steven Universe. I mean, it ain't perfect. But there are, they bring queerness out into the open on a big network. And if that's your, if that's you dipping your toe into this world and this community as a way in, I mean, for the love of God, mine was Joss Whedon and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. How problematic is that now? Like, but
so whenever I play Vampire the Masquerade, I love Bruja, and then lots of people hate them. Lots of people hate that clan so much. I'm like, I grew up on Buffy and Lost Boys. Of course, every vampire design is like a horrible punk who's extremely attractive. Of course they are.
But we can look at these characters, these stories, these influences, and allow ourselves to grow from them and really enhance the experience that we want to tell at the table with the players in mind and what they're looking for, and allowing that to kind of guide us as okay, we don't go down that path because that's messy and full of yikes. But we're definitely, there's an avenue here where we get to navigate, whether as a subtext, queer identity, queer relationships, whatever that might be, or we can strut down the boulevard joyfully, as Prue said it, blaring ABBA out of speakers, and kind of going, this is what we're here for. You know what I mean? We get to decide as the creators and the participants in these, both as a player and as a creator. It's important to kind of look at. And all forms of media are interesting in terms of lessons that we can glean from it. And my own particular style as a writer and as a creator is very, very heavily influenced by Trudy Canavan, a writer out of New Zealand. I went as Aurea of the White on Xbox Live for years, and then I got an awful message from an Aryan going, "You misspelled the name," and I was like, "Excuse me, Xbox, change my name, please, because people think I might be racist." It was like, and even in Trudy's work, queer stories are everywhere, and sometimes they're a part of the plot. They're intrinsically linked to the events that are happening. Other times, where's this guy? He's gone home to his husband, and it's not like his husband.
Yeah,
it's like that. It is put in. She has a wonderful way of sharing and bringing a queerness to her world. And I remember to be that person when everybody was reading Harry Potter, I was reading Trudy Canavan and being like, "No, you should read her." Like, gosh, J.K. Rowling, that's for children. Whoa. Like, read Trudy Canavan. I'm just literally falling in love with her approach. And even now, as I move forward, even with Romancing the Dungeon or that new project Rise of the Forsaken, I still go back to my Trudy Canavan books, and I read, I'll read maybe 4 or 5 chapters that I was really drawn to, and just utterly influenced by, and allowing myself to be influenced and take the goodness out of that and bring it into my games. Even latest She-Ra, like, how phenomenal.
You've just inspired me. I need to DM a Thirsty Sword Lesbians game based on She-Ra.
Oh yeah.
Can we start dibsying spots now? Can we start dibsying spots?
This is a goal of mine right now.
I have done a Magical Girls Thirsty Sword Lesbians game. It's perfect for the genre. It's so good.
I need to know how this author's name is spelt. Trudy Canavan, you say?
Trudi. Canavan, CAN. I'll put it into the chat.
There it is. Yes, please.
Also, because we're talking about, do you mind if I take the book? Am I cool? I just don't want to cut you off if you still
No, please, yes. No, please.
Oh, cool. So I am very influenced by the media I read. I will take little dribs and drabs. Like, sometimes you're playing with friends who want the pop culture reference, right? That's one thing. So sometimes it's just a straight pop culture reference just right in there that people can bounce off. But very often, I've definitely put Bjork in a game before. Kind of thing. But she's basically a fantasy character anyway. She suits tabletop so well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that, like, sometimes I take concepts that I hadn't considered before and I use them. My housemate is in a big West Marches D&D game that I had to pause during the last year and a half. And he wanted to play a dwarf. He is passionate about dwarves. He's the most passionate person I've ever met about dwarves in my life. And he was like, I want this dwarf to be a Terry Pratchett dwarf. And we came up with this whole bit where you're assigned gender at surface, because all the dwarves on the ground, they're like, what's gender? Everybody has a beard. Everybody is, every dwarf is canon, non-binary pansexual, because that's how they work. And if it happens to produce offspring go to a creche and are raised by the clan, and that's why dwarves have such strong clan culture. And so then a dwarf gets to the surface, everyone's like, hello, what's in your clothes? And the dwarves are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, my friend. I'm so sorry. And so we, and that is kind of how Terry Pratchett's dwarves work. They are
that makes me think about
necessarily gendered.
My partner and I watched the first episode of The Watch recently. And Cheery, who works at the Watch, is a female dwarf. And they do a thing where they do this weird explanation, because Carrot arrives, and Carrot is, and they're referring to Cheery with Cheery's pronouns, she, her. And they do a thing where Carrot's confused, and then she has to explain how she's a dwarf and the whole gender thing. And I'm just like, why was that necessary? That makes me feel really uncomfortable.
And then in that world setting, I was like, dwarves that live in the city, and this was inspired by Cheery. Dwarves that live in the city often adapt to genders when they want to. So that if someone comes in and is like, oh, I want to play like Dolly Parton, high femme dwarf, I'm not like, no, your dwarf has to have a beard. No, their dwarf can be whoever they want it to be. But that is like a way in which I've pulled queerness from media and just put it in my game, because it's already ain't broke, don't fix it. Great idea, I'm having it. But then mostly for me though, what I take from media is feelings. I like really want to emulate feelings in my games, and that can be a very queer process, right? Because our relationships with our own identities, our relationships with each other are unique and special, and I try and emulate that, and I really try and emulate like my favorite authors' character work and things like that, because I really want like beautiful, believable characters who you're compelled to be friends with them or hate them or fall in love with them. And I gave you my game to play test Tempest, but that game, I wrote a game. So Sophie is a music producer who I'm gonna make myself really upset, who unfortunately passed away in January, and she just created this space for trans club music that I went to her live show after, so for a long time no one knew who she was. I was like, what does Sophie look like? Who is she? Who are they? Blah blah blah. And then she was like, I'm a trans woman, I look like this. And it was like, she just released a music video where she was topless singing, and it was beautiful and amazing. And then she did a couple live shows. I remember going to that live show and being like maybe 5 years older than the majority of the crowd, because most of them were like 16 to 18. And they were all so joyfully queer in a way that I couldn't have been at 16 to 18. Like, society just wasn't there yet. There was no subculture for me at that time that I could have fallen into. It just, and seeing that was so magical and so transformative. And so when she died, I wanted to make a game that using the media of her music, so not even like story-based media, you could live the experience Sophie created for people.
I'm so sorry, my knuckle hit my phone.
Hi everyone.
I'm so sorry.
I thought you were just like, it's like turning the lights out at the end of the night. It's like, okay, chat finished, fuck off.
I was fiddling with my keyboard when my phone is right next to my keyboard, and I accidentally hit the break button on my touch portal. I'm so sorry.
I don't know at what point we left off, but basically I'm saying that like when I try and emulate queerness from media, I'm trying to emulate a feeling that media gave me, and I try really hard to find a way in storytelling to create an emotion that is tied into my queerness and my game table's queerness, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good source. I mean, like that's the other thing when we're talking about designing with the queerness, that kind of feels like it almost is a solved problem, just not in tabletop role-playing games. Maybe the key is to look at queerness and its representation in other media, and then take it into our hobby, which perhaps, I don't know where you begin with that, but that's something, that's an idea.
Prue, can you click on your web captioner real quick?
Yeah, I can.
I don't know why it keeps doing that. I wish I knew if there was a setting that kept
I've been clicking on it and it's not been updating, and it's still on strawberry blonde on the screen.
Wow.
I haven't talked about strawberry blonde in a long time.
Okay.
I even refreshed the web page. Shall I I can resend you the link just in case it's my link that's gone bust.
Oh, it might not be. Hang on. I'm gonna... Oops, I just
I'm sorry, everyone.
deleted Rick's.
Oh no.
Oh no,
Okay.
you silenced me. Do you need me to resend my link?
No, it's all good. I think that. Oh, I know what I did wrong. There we go. Okay. I'm sorry, folks. I'm working on it. I'm trying to fix it.
Thanks, Tempest.
Yeah, so, what was I going to say? I totally forgot. My experience of the game was that it was very inherently queer without saying so. That it was very much the way that you asked me to think about my feelings and my experience in the moment, and quite possibly just the nature of the music as well. I didn't find the music either to be like outright queer, but maybe that's just because I identify with it and there's not enough contrast in me to it, if that makes sense. But I ended up journaling something that was very queer. It brought out my queerness, and begged me to express that, and I thought that was really beautiful.
Thank you. I'm very proud of the game. I just want it to be as the perfectest it can be before it gets released. And every time I get a playtest, I get yet another comment that's good, and I'm coming to a game design realization that when you design games, there's a point where you just have to stop playtesting and release it.
Yep. And I can tell you that as a writer, especially a writer of scripts that, require other people and all of that, just like games do, there's a point in which you just have to click send. I think, does anyone else have any other comments about this, about any games that they've done that maybe we haven't talked about, something that you wanted to talk about, or anything else about inspiration from queer media?
I would just say, if you're watching this and you don't engage in queer media tons, do and diversify your portfolio. Like RuPaul's Drag Race and Queer Eye, great shows, love them. That is not the only gay experience out there. And it is really fun to engage with more things and see different queer perspectives and how you could sprinkle them in a game. I think is just a fun little cherry I'll put on top of what I was saying.
I suppose I'll just add as well that sounds really trite, but just be kind. Just be a kind dungeon, and just be generous and kind, and feel like what other people are feeling and put other people in there. That sounds really trite, but there we go. That's all I got.
So, and this is reminding me of conversations that I've had recently. I understand that cis-het people are feeling very uncomfortable about their own identities right now, and that they're being demanded, and they realize they're expected to do some work, some introspection, the work that needs to be done in order to respect queer people and marginalized people in the world. It can be painful. It requires you to realize that things that you believed in that supported who you are aren't real, which is a horrible thing to experience. They're painful things, and I think we all understand that these are hard things to do, and the reason we understand that is because we've already had to do them. As queer people, as marginalized people, that is inherent to those identities is the painful work that was done in order for us to accept ourselves and believe in ourselves and own our queerness. And I want to say thank you to the people who are out there and doing the work, and to encourage the people who still have work to do, which is all of us, queer, marginalized, cis-het or not. There's still more work to do. And to say that I invite you to make games that have queerness in them. but I ask that you do the work and you face that difficulty, knowing that the people that you're trying to welcome into your world have already and are continually facing that pain and that difficulty. And I would say thank you for doing it. So I think we can, it's 7:05. I think we've actually managed to touch on everything on our list, really. Yes. Which I'm surprised about. I now feel guilty because I don't feel obligated. I'm sad because I now don't have an obligation to do another one of these. But I might find, I'll look for a reason. I will look for a reason, I promise. We'll do another queer one. So let's sign off then. If Declan, you would like to do a little who are you? And
I am Declan. I am the creator and DM for the large podcast called Romance in the Dungeon. You can find us over at D8 Dungeon. We have a charity event coming up soon as well. Next weekend, 24-hour marathon, very much inspired by the work of Prue, Tempest, and others in their event back in May. You can follow me on Twitter at DeclanDDY. And if there's anything I've touched on or you want to talk about afterwards, feel free to get in touch with me. I'd like to end it with just, firstly, Tempest, thank you so much for having me on. I've had such a phenomenal experience, and I got kind of low towards the last bit, because I've taken quite a bit from this myself in listening to you and Ricardo and Prue, and even kind of comments in the chat. And it's one of my favorite things about this community, and even our little kind of group within that, our community within this community means quite a lot. And lastly, be queer, do crimes, play TTRPGs.
100%.
Good advice.
I just got excited because one of Rick and my friends, who was a player in the campaign I retired from, just finally decided to speak up in chat. Yay, hi Cat. Okay. Rick, who have you been?
I've been, and I always will be, Rick. Pronouns he, him. I'm a DM, and I do some very amateurish game design. You can find my socials on grizzlyeye.com. I'm very self-deprecating, and I make Morgan roll their eyes all the time. And I just want to say thank you to Morgan organising this. I've learned so much, and I think I've definitely got a lot more to think about when I apply this to my own games and design. So thank you to Prue and Declan as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And stop being mean to yourself. You are wonderful. You are the best. Yeah. You are excellent. He makes great games. Go read his website. Prue, who have you been?
I've been many a person. No, I'm Prue. I float about on the internet under the moniker Proopy Pants, which is where, if you want to keep up to date with me and the stuff I'm involved in, follow that, because I do lots of things. I will quickly do a reel off of the things I do. I run a UK and European tabletop role-playing game Discord that's this, busy but still very friendly, small enough to get involved in community on Discord. And we also then run charity events off the back of that via something called Roll for Good. I play tabletop role-playing games over at Chasing Tales Role-Playing Games, which is my home turf. I play Warhammer 40k with Witch and Craft games. I play Dungeons and Dragons with Kill It Cajun RPG. I got all sorts of different little streams floating about on the internet. And then also I have, as alluded to in this panel, begun on my own little journey of game design. I hope to release that Sophie game sometime. We will see. I'm not putting pressure on myself. But yeah, just come follow me if you're interested in queerness, tabletop role-playing game.
Forgotten to do the things again. I'm the worst. I'm so bad at this. Okay, there we go. Declan and Rick and Prue. I almost put an extra exclamation point after Prue.
Sound like
The
a
Oxford
little
comma.
echo of everybody else. It has been really lovely to sit here and chat. I really love hearing other people's opinions on how we should and shouldn't be doing things, and I really liked how Felicity put it in the chat about like how it was nice that we all had very different views, but we all had the general same trend of views, and that's been really pleasant to weave all of your ideas into my brain.
Yeah.
Threads.
I've loved
Thank
this
you,
so
everyone.
much. You're all magical wonders. And I hope to have Rick's already committed to being on my channel. Whether he regrets it or not, I don't know, but
I love every minute.
He's
every
already
single
on
minute.
my channel every week, where we're supposedly doing hacks, but mostly just bullshitting. It's great fun. It really is. We get into some serious subjects like this, and we have a good time. We have good chats. In fact, doing that with Rick is probably what's given me the confidence to finally, pull this together. And I'm really glad that I have. You're all wonderful people, and I hope you will come on my channel again and do other things with me. Maybe even a Thirsty Sword Lesbians Does Shira game. Yes, I am Morgan, aka Tempest. This is my channel, Tempest Games, where I do world building and TTRPG and board game design content. I am also going into starting on my first foray into having actual published games. I know that one of the premise of one of my shows is that I'm working on a larger RPG. But I am actually about to publish my first one-page RPG. Its title is currently Corporate Overgoats. It's about goats and capitalism.
I actually play tested it, and it's really good fun. Like really good fun.
Oh my god, we had so much fun at that. It was just ridiculous fun. It is queer in that it is ridiculous, and you can be whatever you want to be, and you could choose a genre, and that genre could be Drag Race. That genre could be queer teen drama. There you go. That's a good one. I'm now seeing a Riverdale go over corporate overgoats.
A Buffy corporate.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. So I'm still putting. I don't have a portfolio. I know I have stuff to put in a portfolio. And I will officially be an RPG writer when this game is done. So I'm working on making that RPG. I'm working on building up my portfolio, and that will be available at some time. I bought a domain for my portfolio, morganj.games. That's what I've just I'm so excited. That's what I've decided that my credit is going to be as an RPG writer is going to be Morgan J. So look for my name on things. Yes, it's Kat has also play tested it with me. We did Cosmic Horror for that game. That was very hilarious and exciting, and I wish Hope was here because Hope had the best character. Oh no, I'm gonna have more players than I think I could ever possibly manage for this game. So thank you everyone for coming. This has been miraculous. You are all wonders. You are all wonderful. It is just such a pleasure to have you and to have so many people come and want to hear me and my friends talk about queerness in TTRPGs, and I hope that we do it again. And I think for sure I'm going to be looking at some other topics for this series, Design with Intent. If you have any suggestions for things that you'd like to hear me and my guests talk about, I would love to hear what you're interested in. And thank you all for coming. I've done enough waffling. I love you all. Bye.